Good morning, everyone. My name is Gina Late-Liston, and I'd like to welcome you this morning to Nechako Watershed Roundtable's annual meeting. This year, we'll be delving into BC's water governance and celebrating the accomplishments throughout the watersheds, what needs to be considered, and what the path is going forward. A few virtual hosting items. Tasha and Lindsay, Nechako Watershed Roundtable's Secretariat staff, will be supporting us by taking notes this morning and monitoring the chat. This is a tight agenda, so any questions that can go into the chat will be answered in the summary meeting notes, and all of the speakers' bios are included in the agenda. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the website along with the meeting summary. The summary will also be emailed out to all of those registered this morning. There is a break also at 10:30 a.m. So with gratitude and respect, we would like to acknowledge that the territory that we are hosting from is on the ancestral lands of the Lheidli First Nation. You're welcome to provide your acknowledgement in the chat of all the territories that you are joining us from today. So it is with gratitude that John Casamel, who is an elder with the Cheslata Carrier Nation and is also an advisor on the Climate Change Adaptation and Resilience Steering Committee, was invited this morning to provide our territorial welcome. We have not quite heard from him yet, so we're hoping at some point this morning we will be going back, having him be able to do that with us this morning. So we're going to move to our into the rest of our agenda this morning, which the first will include an update from the Nechako Watershed Roundtable, the NWR Lakes Monitoring Working Group, and the Nechako portal. I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, sorry guys, I totally practiced this. Okay. Okay, so welcome again, everyone. We're so happy that everyone is here this morning. We're going to give a little bit of an update for the Nechako Watershed. Sorry, I'm just getting a text in here about this. Okay, we're just waiting to hear if John is available. So you might see me checking my text for a few moments. So here's our agenda for today. I will note again that fairly tight agenda. So we will be taking all those questions in the chat and getting them answered. Our core committee members are listed there on the screen. I very much, as co-chair with Kim Menounos from the Fraser Basin Council, very much appreciate all the time and dedication that goes into being a member on the core committee, and that includes Lara, Brian, Ray, Shirley. Our new member as of late is Stefan, Mike Robertson, and Wayne. All very important on this committee, moving it forward and such. And our coordinator is Tasha. While Margot is not here today, we very much want to thank Dr. Margot Parks for her time that she has been on the core committee. She's dedicated her time to both the core committee, as the co-chair for a number of years. She was our lead for the youth engagement and the Nechako portal. She is now being replaced with Stefan from UMBC. So thank you very much for that, Margot, for your time. As a project status update for the 2024 projects that we've had, you can see there's a number of working groups, some work that we've done with the watershed security strategy. So that's in engaging in the discussion and development. You'll have an update from the Nechako portal, the Lakes Monitoring Working Group. We're very excited to see what work we can do with the youth engagement group. So that's both seeking for that funding and developing those partnerships. And then the work that you'll also hear about at the end of the meeting is the resiliency framework that will be discussed.
On this kind of
for a great website and all of the information you might need about the Nechako Watershed Roundtable is on the website. The Secretariat staff do a fantastic job of keeping this up to date. So anything you need to know that we're working on and that is going on in the watershed, looking at current project, recent news and events, all of those can be found on that website. And of course, thank you to our sponsors. So Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Ministry of Forests, University of Northern British Columbia, the Regional District of Fraser-Fort George, and the District of Vanderhoof. Without those sponsors, a lot of this work cannot get done. Of great importance is that we are seeking First Nations perspectives onto the NWR core committee. So if there's any interest out there, we would absolutely welcome anyone contacting us. Okay, we're moving on. We'll have Wayne Selesky, who is our working group chair for the Lakes Monitoring Working Group, now come on and discuss and give us an update. Wayne?
Thank you very much, Dina. I'm assuming you can hear me well?
Yeah.
Great. The machinery tells me to be cautious here about my voice for some reason. Thanks to everybody. I appreciate the large audience today and the support. I personally believe that this is one of the most important groups we have in Northern British Columbia, and that's kind of support and attendance is just amazing and helps us build what we really need to do, and that's get our voice out there. So the Large Lake Monitoring Group has been working on this project for about 3 years now. We've had some wonderful group meetings with the nation's stakeholders, DFO. Our belief is pretty simplistic. Healthy lakes will support a healthy salmon fry population, move them to the ocean in a better condition, larger, fatter, and more chances of success. So that's kind of the foundations of the belief. Period. And while working on that stuff, we have been doing some interim funding where we have made a couple of major funding applications that didn't make it through the systems. So we have been doing some interim funding through FBC and TACLA, and we want to thank TACLA and the nations for the work that they have been doing, getting the jump on that. Since then, we've had several funding applications for strategic implementation, and we're really, really excited. And you'll hear from one of our following speakers that ECCC has come through for us, and we'll talk a little bit later about that type of money. So the next real big step for us as a group is we have an upcoming meeting here on October 21st. We're very pleased Spruce City Wildlife Association has allowed us to use their facility, so we'll be meeting both in person and online. If you want to be involved, that will be the time to do that. We'll send out the links to any other requests, but we're really excited. I think DFO is moving forward on this conversation with us. We have each of the nations with their own staff and staffing issues that we're going to be able to do. So I think for the first time in 3 years, I'm totally optimistic that we have the big picture captured, and appreciate the opportunity to share that with you.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. Okay, next we will have an update from the Nechako portal. Lucas, are you ready to go?
Actually, Gina, I will lead the presentation if
Oh,
that's
okay.
okay
Sorry,
for
Stefan.
now, but I will need to share my screen if that's possible, please.
Sure, I will stop.
I'll share mine. Is that coming up for people?
Now it is, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, good morning, everybody. Hari, and I'm Stefan Deary. I'm presenting this morning on behalf of the Integrated Watershed Research Group at UNBC, joining you from unceded and traditional territory of the Tene. And we'll provide you a very brief update on what the IWG has been doing over the past couple of, months. And then we'll jump into an update from the Nechako Watershed Portal with Lucas. So the NWRG, if you're not familiar with the team, we were assembled in 2013, and we brought essentially 4 different faculty members with different backgrounds. And I cover the topic of climate change and water security. Doctors Phil Owens and Ellen Pettigrew, also at UNBC, look at sediment sources and sediment quality. We have Dr. Margot Parks, of course, for tools for integration in watershed, essentially health and well-being, as well as governance. And we also recruited at that time Barry Booth as our research manager. And Barry actually assisted us over the first essentially 10 years of activity that we had with support from the Nechako Environmental Enhancement Fund for 2 phases of research. Now we're actually in the midst of our 3rd phase of research, again with support from the Nechako Environmental Enhancement Fund, and we are extremely grateful for the support they have provided us. And of course, we've been able to match those funds. So to date, we've assembled nearly $3 million to support integrated watershed research in the Nechako watershed. In 2022, we had Dr. Eduardo Martins join the NWRG, and he's a freshwater fish and habitat expert. So very pleased to have him in our team now for the 3rd phase of research that we're leading. We had recruited in 2023 Bruno Sobral as a research manager, and unfortunately he had to leave for personal circumstances. So now we're very pleased to have Lucas Mura as our research manager. And just Friday, we were actually given some really good news from the Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Canada Water Agency, that we were able to secure some additional funding that will actually be able to amplify our Nechako watershed research this coming fiscal year. And essentially what we wanted to relate to everybody is the publication of a synthesis paper that just came out in July, essentially summarizing the major findings and lessons learned from phases 1 and 2 of integrated watershed research. So it is this paper that was just published, as I mentioned, in the journal called PLOS Water. It is an open access article, and so anyone can access it freely using the link at the top of this slide, and we'll probably post in the chat as well. And you see the list of co-authors there. It is the NWRG, and we have got a long title here for this article, Towards an Integrative Understanding of British Columbia's Nechako Watershed, Connecting Knowledge Systems to Strengthen Understanding of Climate Change, Watershed Security, Health, and Well-Being. And essentially, again, it summarizes the first 2 phases of research, essentially some of the lessons learned. It is a complex system, again, so that's why we had to bring, different people with various expertise. We talk about the climate crisis, land use changes, land cover disturbances, right, wildfires, how that's impacting the landscapes. So if you want to read up, you're welcome to access the link and find out a little bit more about the conclusions that we actually achieve in the first 2 phases of research. And one diagram that you'll see in our paper is this one. Essentially, we're using the analogy of a braided river. And you can imagine, perhaps 3 or 4 faculty members with their own individual fields of research. But with integrated research, we merge that as if the channels within this braided river, that leads to integrated research. And ultimately, as you see on the right-hand side, if the water is flowing from left to right, some shared ideas and pathways, and essentially to bring a broader perspective on what's happening in the Nechako watershed. And of course, you see at the bottom there of our legend, we added Dr. Eduardo Martins to bring that additional expertise on freshwater fish and habitat, which is really merging really well with the other three themes of research. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'm going to pass it over to Lucas, our research manager, to talk a little bit about the Nechako Watershed Portal.
Thank you, Stefan. Hello, everyone. Have a good morning today. And also with the Nechako Watershed Portal, since I'm started as a research manager, we are trying to develop ideas that could connect and enhance the watershed health and watershed management in our region, right? The portal has this power of as a repository of information, but also could be something called a collaborative platform that we can connect diverse stakeholders, force any kind of knowledge, and hopefully get insights that we could help water management. Within this idea, for example, using the large lakes monitoring strategy, I would like just to mention that throughout this month, we are super open to discuss any ideas and projects that we can use inside with the portal and foster new projects and maybe develop more ideas within this framework. And I'm just want to say that I'm here open to through the YWG email to help anyone, and we can discuss with the professors how we can use this tool and also this platform to leverage the health of our ecosystem. And to finally finish the update, we have a short video to present by the end that basically we are creating some new videos to show some functionalities from the portal. That way we can discuss and show any other topics that might be relevant using the portal. And this one specifically will mention about the project function in the portal that we can help and understand how all the data that is imported to the portal we can connect and get some insights. Thank you.
And I'm going to play the video now. That's okay.
Imagine accessing a curated package of information on indicators specific to your region, all at your fingertips. That's the power of the project function on the Nechako Watershed Portal.
This tool revolutionizes how we interact with complex datasets. Think of it as a pre-assembled toolkit for understanding critical issues like climate change.
Here's how it works. Specialists in their field curate datasets related to specific projects or themes such as climate change indicators. These datasets are packaged and made available on the portal. Users can easily load these packages into their portal interface, and loading a package reveals all the relevant spatial layers, providing a comprehensive view of the project data.
For example, a climate change package could include layers showing historical temperature trends, precipitation patterns, areas at risk from wildfires or flooding. These allow users to visualize and analyze the interconnectedness of climate change impacts within the Nechako watershed.
The project function empowers stakeholders with easy access to curated information, enhanced understanding through visualization, and an improved decision-making capability. The Nechako Watershed Portal is transforming how we share and utilize data for a more sustainable future. Thank you.
So I would love to be present here, and if anyone would like to discuss with us, we are always open to new ideas and help. Hopefully, we can help all the working groups as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Lucas and Stefan. Well, we're a bit ahead of schedule, so we are going to move on to our next portion of the agenda, which is watershed governance. So Ian Rogalski, who is the senior analyst with Canada Water Agency, is going to be providing us an overview of the Canada Water Agency and the Fraser River Freshwater Ecosystem Initiative. So Ian, I understand you're going to be sharing your screen with us.
I am certainly going to try.
And while you're doing that, I'll just give Ian has been leading the development and implementation of a new program, the Fraser River Freshwater Ecosystem Initiative, that aims to address water quality issues and promote the health of the Fraser River Basin through improved partnership with Indigenous peoples, provinces, territories, and stakeholders. Ian, welcome.
Thank you much. I appreciate the opportunity to share some information today and update some folks. Can you see the presentation that I am?
Yeah, it looks great.
That I think I'm currently sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Good stuff. So I'm going to try not to take up all the free time that's been made available by the previous speakers here today, notwithstanding that I'm kind of prone to some of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to run through the front end of this presentation super quickly, mostly because it's a lot of national stuff that while it has relevance to the Nechako and all the issues that we're facing here in BC, it's a little bit less directly relevant, I guess, and then we'll get right into what has been my baby over the past few years, and will hopefully be something that we can continue to collaborate through the roundtable on with everybody on the call, and hopefully lots of folks that aren't on the call here today as well. So run through where we're kind of coming from in terms of creating the Canada Water Agency, what our main priorities are both nationally and regionally, and then we'll focus in on the freshwater ecosystem initiatives in the Fraser. So I don't think I need to sell this group on all the reasons why we might need a Canada Water Agency or a public entity that's focusing on water issues at its core, as opposed to a whole suite of other things like climate change or air quality and then those types of things as well. The current Liberal government came in 2017 as part of its platform commitment with plans, at least in 2017, for a Canada Water Agency, viewing all these things as relevant nationally and seeing that there were some gaps that needed addressing in terms of a common approach to some extent to addressing freshwater quality and ecosystem health issues nationally and regionally, bringing about a degree of collaboration and cooperation, again, both nationally and regionally, that weren't necessarily apparent, I guess I'm saying. Took us a little while to get organized and figure out how we wanted to breathe some life into this. Part of the reason is because even just within the federal government, there's an assessment done while we were developing a lot of this stuff. And I think it was 23 or so federal departments that have some skin in the game with respect to water in their jurisdictional mandate areas. And so in any case, we're kind of getting there is what it comes down to. Budget 2023 finally brought some of this into focus and provided a fair amount of resources over 10 years for us to stand up an agency. And we're almost there, I guess, is what it comes down to. So that included almost $1 billion over 10 years, 85 million or so to actually stand up the agency, 650 million over 10 years in support of monitoring, assessment, and restoration work in ecosystem initiatives across the country. You'll note the Fraser River watershed in there, and we'll get to that here in a few minutes. And as well, 22.6 million over 3 years to get our act together is what it kind of comes down to nationally, including the federal health and order and a few other national conversations as well. Important to underscore at the bottom of the slide there that involving Indigenous peoples and all steps of implementation of both the Canada Water Agency and the Freshwater Action Plan are absolutely core commitments for us as well. And that budget 2023 also committed to introducing legislation in the last year or so to fully establish the agency as a standalone entity. That was completed about 6 months ago through the budget implementation bill. And so the legislative tools are in place, and we hope to have some news. I'm not going to say it, but in the next month or so about how we're actually following through on that and standing on our own 2 feet as an agency. In the meantime, we've been created as a branch within Environment and Climate Change Canada since June 2023. Under the mandate of providing leadership, collaboration federally, and improved coordination with everybody else that has skin in the game with respect to water and water quality and ecosystem health. Again, is a banner term that you'll hear come up in terms of how we're framing things quite a bit, and to get more proactive and organized really on national and regional transboundary water management issues. And again, that sort of super high level statement around keeping Canada's water resources safe, clean, and well managed. important to note there too that we're fully planning to be regionally responsive to the diversity of environments and water issues across Canada. Headquarters is not going to be in Ottawa, not even in Ontario. Headquarters is going to be in Winnipeg, and they're currently staffing a lot of that up. But we're going to have regional offices across the country as well that will be making sure we have sort of boots on the ground and a feel for what's going on in all parts of the country. And so my day-to-day job is based out of Vancouver. In the not too distant future here, once we are up on our own 2 feet as an agency reporting to Parliament through the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, we will have a president. Right now it's an acting Assistant Deputy Minister. Daniel Wolfish is his name. And he's been pretty highly, he's been really busy, but been quite engaging as well, and out there quite a bit, raising the specter of the Canada Water Agency and shepherding us through a pretty interesting last couple of years when it comes to setting up a new federal agency. Just a quick, super high level org chart in terms of how we're structured currently, and we'd anticipate this would be maintained through when we are standing up as an agency. Over on the right-hand side is all the good stuff that keeps everything running. On the corporate side of things, down the middle is the national stuff for the most part in terms of national policy coordination and engagement coordination with national groups. Including national Indigenous organizations and including provinces and territories and some of the national processes is what it comes down to, and we'll get into some of the more details on that in the next couple of slides. People like me that worry about freshwater management on both a national and regional watershed scale are off on the left-hand side there under Freshwater Management Directorate. Ontario has its own because they're a big Great Lakes program that's been around for 50 years, and they've got quite a program, finely oiled machine there. The rest of us, if you will, in terms of west and north, are encapsulated in that other part of the organization there. So I will move on and just provide a quick overview of some of the national initiatives that are currently being undertaken while we're waiting for sort of the formal establishment of ourselves as an agency. One of the things is establishing a federal freshwater committee. So I made passing mention there a few minutes ago around getting the federal house in order on water and herding those 23 or so cats that each have some skin in the game with respect to water issues and management on the national level. And so one of the things that's been done is to strike a permanent committee. I think the first few meetings were at the DM level, mostly it's at the ADM level, I think, and then they'll have some working groups underneath it to get at many of the issues that we all see as a lack of coordination and collaboration amongst federal agencies at the very least, and will bring us towards some more whole of government approaches to freshwater and watershed management issues. Second on the list there is the Federal Freshwater Hub. What that is a little office within the Canada Water Agency, where we are bringing into the Canada Water Agency water managers from other departments within the Federal Public Service, so that we don't have to rely on that committee to bring that sort of integration into our day-to-day. We can have those folks in-house. They come in on 2 to 3 year assignments. And so right now we have folks from DFO, from StatsCan, from I think it's Natural Resources, and there's one other department as well that are sort of at the core, agriculture, that's what it is, to facilitate all the things, frankly, within the Canada Water Agency and integration in that regard. And so we've, even in my Fraser specific work, had many great and productive meetings and conversations and some projects ongoing that integrate what Stats can bring to the table, what Ag can bring to the table, different federal agencies. And again, as a more operational way of promoting that sort of horizontal cooperation across the federal family. They're working on a Water One window. I'm not sure how much I love the title there, but at the very least, it's going to be somewhere where anyone that is worried about how the federal government is worried about water can go to at the very least find some information and hopefully get their sort of information sort of triaged or their queries triaged and pointed in the right direction is what it comes down to. Whether that be into the federal freshwater hub or what have you. One of the very key things that we saw or heard, I should say, during the first couple of years of engagement that we did around how Canadians and others feel that we should be building the Canada Water Agency is that there was a pretty significant lack of awareness around what was actually available to people already in terms of data and information and knowledge products that were created by governments and others. And so this Water One window is a way to get at some of those awareness issues. And last is the National Freshwater Data Strategy and Science Agenda, two related pieces that aim, again, to bring in sort of that water lens to all water data federally, or I should say nationally, not federally, and establish a national freshwater science agenda as well, so that, again, facilitating that coordination amongst the more scientific conversations, relatively speaking, around how we manage water in Canada. I should note that right now, actually, there's a national workshop on the freshwater data strategy happening in Burlington, Ontario, that's bringing together some, but definitely not all, because they had some limited space, folks from across the country on how we should be conceiving of that data strategy and where some of the maybe low-hanging fruit from an operational perspective and where there might be some shared aspirations for how we manage water data nationally. Once we're on our own 2 feet, there's a commitment also to open up or at the very least look at how we maybe should open up the Canada Water Act. Right now, that's sort of the primary piece of legislation that enables federal government departments to get into water management, particularly on a transboundary basis. But it came into force in 1970 and hasn't been updated since. So, 50 some years. And it has some pretty significant shortcomings as well in terms of how we understand water and water management issues these days. Not the least of which is that it doesn't authorize us to enter into an agreement with First Nations. And so there's a few things that obviously need to be sort of addressed in that context. Actual engagement on that, again, is going to be after we actually stand up as an agency, but hopefully that will be have some momentum behind it pretty quickly here in 2025. Sorry, just glancing down at the time. Okay, we are getting into the regional initiatives now. So that $650 million on one of my earlier slides was spread out across 8 freshwater ecosystem initiatives, we're calling them, across the country. Some of these have a long history already. I mentioned the Great Lakes earlier, St. Lawrence, Lake Winnipeg, and a few others. And some of them are relatively new and recent in terms of bringing into focus around a program of activities in a particular watershed. And for us, those 3 main new ones are the Wostock St. John out east and the Mackenzie and Fraser out west and north. And so folks around this call here, of course, will be hopefully happy to see and hear that there's an increased focus coming on both the Fraser and Mackenzie watersheds with respect to both water quality and ecosystem health. One thing I forgot to mention is that part of the reason why we keep our harping, if you will, on that water quality and ecosystem health slogan, is that we are relying on, at least at this stage, Environment and Climate Change Canada's more traditional roles from a legislative and jurisdictional perspective on water quality from sort of a toxic and contamination perspective, and also as a nutrient management perspective. And so that's sort of at the core of where we're coming at from a legislative perspective, but obviously acknowledging that we're all working in a broader ecosystem and have ultimately very aligned interests for both the health and productivity of those ecosystems. And so notwithstanding sort of our priorities for nutrient and contaminant management, more than happy to be working with everyone in the watershed towards those shared goals in the long term. And across each of the 8 freshwater ecosystem initiatives across the country, we have a set of common priorities, is what it comes down to. And so working collaboratively with Indigenous partners, provinces, territories, other partners to take action for restoration and protection, to advance science and monitoring, to enhance governance, to be mobilizing knowledge and reporting to at the very least so that we can measure progress, if not have a common understanding of where we're even at in terms of watershed health, and to improve climate change resiliency. And I should note that Environment and Climate Change Canada still does remain the national backbone of a lot of the science conversation. The Canada Water Agency is not taking many things away from Environment and Climate Change Canada as we do step away now. Environment and Climate Change Canada is keeping the water quantity and quality monitoring networks that they have been operating for a long time in cooperation with provinces and territories across the country. There's still the science and research hub and the forecasting and modeling expertise remains there. The Canada Water Agency at this stage is mostly about that sort of national engagement and coordination and priority setting and action from a funding program perspective as well. And we'll get into that here, where I'll underscore that each freshwater ecosystem initiative does come with the complement of its own funding resources to advance ecosystem and watershed specific objectives and focus on the priorities for restoration and conservation in those areas. Eco Action, which some of you might be aware of and have some history with already, will remain available nationally. That map that I showed earlier does not cover 100% of Canada. And so there's an opportunity there for Eco Action to be able to support action-based projects, both within some of the freshwater ecosystem initiatives work and informed by, but importantly outside of those areas that are covered by a freshwater ecosystem initiative. So we'll step into the Fraser here. Bonus points for anybody who's not Wayne, because this is around the corner from his place, that can identify this particular spot. But anyway, maybe we can quiz on that during the break or something like that. Obviously, again, I don't need to underscore with this group per se the stress that the Fraser, and particularly the northern half, I might say, is under now and has been for some time. Map on the left maps out the impact of mountain pine beetle up until 2011 at least. Of course, it's been ongoing since then. I think that was a Canadian Geographic map from some time ago. The one on the right is a map that we developed in 2019 to help make the case for the Fraser work as part of the analysis that we were undergoing internally, and underscores both the mountain pine beetle work, the forest fire areas burned up until 2018. There's still, I think, a lot more red on that map if we were to update it these days, especially up in Nechako for sure. Of course, Trans Mountain's in there. The relatively few dams, major dams, I should say, that are part of the system. And of course, metal mining operations that are starred on the map as well. At the same time, the map on the right shows where, as part of the national monitoring networks that Environment and Climate Change Canada maintains in cooperation with the province of BC, there's a lot of places where we are looking, for lack of a better description, and a quick glance at that map shows a lot of places that are off the main stem of the Fraser that we aren't looking at. And frankly, that's something that we've identified as part of the problem, if you will, when it comes to building some knowledge and making some priorities up and down the Fraser for our collective efforts to ensure that we've got a productive watershed in all reaches moving forward. Few issues that we kind of highlighted to date in the limited engagement that we've been able to do. And I keep saying we, but I should underscore here that I am the Fraser program right now. I'm the two boots on the ground. We're in the process of hiring a small team that will be able to inform my non-scientific mind with a lot more scientific coordination and expertise, and some other policy and programmatic supports as well. It's a pretty lean team right now, but we're getting there. Water quality hotspots, of course, and primary issues, again, with respect to that contamination and nutrient pollution up and down the basin include, algal blooms from eutrophication, ongoing and legacy issues from mining developments. One of the things that we're looking at intently in the Nicola is risks that are coming about from major works in the recovery from the 2021 flooding, the atmospheric river events. A lot of material was moved around to reestablish infrastructure and that kind of stuff. And with the changing flows and sedimentation and all those types of things, surveillance at the very least of risks that people are envisioning from some of those pieces of work is top of mind. Of course, the landscape scale changes that we looked at earlier in passing, at least around non-pine beetle and wildfires, significant shifts to the makeup of the watershed that need to be understood, how they're going to impact both in the short term and the long term, the issues that we'll need to be managing together. And then keeping an eye on emerging contaminants as well. There's a lot of attention around 6-PBD quinone right now, but a lot of other contaminant issues that have varying degrees of relevance up and down the watershed, and certainly up in some of the upper watersheds. That being said, there's a lot going on already up and down the Fraser. There's a lot of strong foundations for collaboration, not just within Environment and Climate Change Canada, there at the top. I mentioned what ECCC is keeping. People like me have been working since 2017 under what's called the Freshwater Action Plan to keep the flame alive on a few things in parts of the country that haven't been funded until this budget 2023 resources came around. And there's some related issues federally, including from the Wales Initiative, that are very relevant to water quality in the Fraser. This map on the right is work that they did over the last few years, identifying point source pollution hotspots up and down the watershed that at the very least point us into certain directions when we can be investigating things like potential bioaccumulation of contaminants in salmon populations that then become food for killer whales once they reach the Salish Sea. And so, pieces like that are part of how we can, add layers to the knowledge that we carry with us as we try to work through a lot of these ecosystem health issues together. DFO, of course, has no end to their wide body of work around things like the Pacific Salmon Strategic Initiative and their integrated planning for salmon ecosystems work. where you know, in my view at least, there's an increasing openness to having broader conversations around sort of like the horizontal results for ecosystem health that include salmon. You know, and to that end, you know, there's lots of promise and opportunity there, I think. And certainly through conversations I've been having with them, both at the regional and local level and at headquarters level, lots of opportunity for collaboration there moving forward. Not too long ago, there's a very broad agreement that covered about $1 billion worth of investment under the Canada BC First Nations Leadership Council Tripartite Framework Agreement on Nature Conservation that set up its own governance structure around how large swaths of federal and provincial money are spent on conservation work in any number of respects. And it's just one example really of pretty significant pieces of work that offer opportunities for us to both input to and coordinate with respect to how all of us are working in the watershed to, again, ultimately well-aligned objectives, but coming from our own perhaps narrow perspective on things. And then, of course, the province of BC, who you know, has lead jurisdictional mandate within the Crown context for water management and land use and all those types of things, has been quite proactive on a national stage with respect to things like the watershed security strategy, the fund that I think currently has a call for proposals open, or maybe they're right in between them. And really showing new pathways, certainly within BC and maybe nationally as well, with respect to approaches to collaborative watershed governance at the BC and First Nations level that can provide, I think, both insight for potential paths forward on all these things, but also no shortage of opportunity for us to be doing things in better ways as we sort of move forward here. So as we try and get our feet under us here with respect to a Fraser program within the Canada Water Agency under the Fraser Freshwater Ecosystem Initiative, we've identified a few key strategies for ourselves. Within the context of a longer term view of, you know, we can't do everything right away, I guess is what it kind of comes down to, and trying to bite off some reasonable pieces for us to chew on for the next, you know, 10 years is what it comes down to. So that mandate and the funding from budget 2023 gave us a 10-year mandate. So political wins notwithstanding, we have adopted some key strategies here that are sort of the foundations of what my work will be and my team's work will be over the coming years. So engagement. So we've been out of the game for a long time, ECCC and the Canada Water Agency is new, obviously. And so talking like this with groups like this is really going to be key for us for a number of years here as we try to bring into focus the niche and the value that we might be able to fill and provide to all the good work that's already going on, and perhaps to bring about some action where it might be needed, I guess is what it comes down to. And so, you know, I've specifically mentioned the NWR in the slide here, you know, it's groups like this and in the Shuswap, in the Nicola and other places of the Fraser, where we see, you know, relatively broad representation of interest throughout the watershed coming together to bring about some of that coordination at the sub-basin level of the Fraser at least. And so very important for us to be continuing to have fruitful relationships with groups like the Nechako Watershed Roundtable. Information sharing and coordination. So we have some objectives there around creating support to foster shared understanding and increase collaboration. And so what that is hopefully going to entail in cooperation or in tandem with that last priority as well is that, you know, working across knowledge systems to foster a shared understanding of what we all consider to be a healthy Fraser watershed, and aligning our actions with that set of values. And that's something that we can take and inform how we leverage our resources that we can bring to the table as a water agency, but also lift up those that maybe have been underrepresented in a lot of those conversations up until now. And so I guess that's all I'll say about that at this stage. And again, the engagement's going to really inform the how on a lot of this. Like I said, I keep saying we're still getting our feet under us. That's very true. But you know, with these priorities in mind, how we actually go about breathing life into them really does need to be the product of some stronger relationships and some further conversations with everybody around this call today, and hopefully a lot of others as well. I should underscore that last bullet there at the bottom, where we do have some somewhat longer term aspirations as well to be developing something that we can sort of describe as a state of aquatic ecosystem health reporting approach framework in cooperation with everyone, and I should say one that's actually useful for people that aren't working for the Canada Water Agency. And so again, underscoring the importance of the engagement aspect there, and the fact that we're working on this journey together. I guess that last bullet underscores things here. You know, I'll say that we've got some initial concepts of a plan, to steal that phrase, around how we might start to inform a discussion around approaches to state basin reporting. That includes you know, a little bit of looking back in terms of what we've got now to bring to the table with literature reviews and some of those types of things. But again, once we've got a bit more of a staff complement here, we can breathe a bit more life into some of those conversations about how we might go about developing an approach to state basin reporting together. With that, I think what I'd like to move on to here is my last slide. That underscores what we've been able to make some progress with respect to the funding program resources we've been able to leverage into the Fraser FREI so far for this year. And so, you know, I'm not going to stand here and be like, I'd like to announce or anything like that. But here's a good overview of what we've been able to confirm so far for this year. And of course, the top three there are up here in the Nechako. So we've been able to get a few pretty integral, I think, projects approved for the roundtable itself and many of its key projects around implementing the strategic plan for the roundtable over the next little while. Certainly with the University of Northern BC as well around the portal work and some of the more integrated approaches to managing Nechako, as well as through the UFFCA, expanding the water monitoring program that's led by the Sycas and Wet'suwet'en First Nations in cooperation with some of the other funding initiatives that are up there these days. Likewise, you know, we've got some funding approved with the Shuswap Watershed Council to advance their strategic plan in the direction of wetlands and some increased water quality monitoring. Some work with the Lower Nicola Indian Band to strengthen collaboration in that sub-watershed. And then a few Fraser-wide projects that are looking at both sort of increasing the amount of expertise for water quality monitoring up and down the watershed, as well as platforming some knowledge around who's doing what up and down the watershed. This is the Rivershed Society BC project that should come to light here in the winter, I think, for everyone. And get at some of those awareness issues around who's doing what up and down the watershed to facilitate, hopefully, not only some increased knowledge, but some increased collaboration and coordination. There is more to come on this. I've been asked quite frequently around where the funding call for proposals are for the Fraser. We're getting there. We hope to be, along with some of the other freshwater ecosystem initiatives across the country, announcing a call for applications this calendar year, knock on wood, with a view to projects that would be starting after April 1st. I should say that the numbers here on this slide don't tell the whole story quite yet, because we're still working on a number of things to bolster some of these projects and to add some more projects to the list as well for funding that we'll be able to provide in support of good work like the Nechako Watershed Roundtable this year and beyond, kind of thing. So that's all I've got for today. This is me in terms of how to get a hold of me outside of my email that you might have from the distribution list here. But we do have one web page right now for the Canada Water Agency. We are working diligently behind the scenes to build that out quite a bit. And hopefully coordination with a pretty big announcement in the not too distant future. And if you're one of those people that likes to hang out on social media or some version of it, I still do hang around on X. There's some useful information there that I like to share around. So feel free to follow me there. And if you ever want to get in contact, I'm also on LinkedIn. Yeah, looking forward to building out this program for the Fraser and continuing to support the good work of good groups like the Nechako Watershed Roundtable and others around the table here today. If anybody's got any bright ideas for me, I'm more than happy to hear them. So I think
Thanks
that's
a
all I've
lot,
got for today.
Ian, for the information about the Canada Water Agency and the Fraser River Freshwater Ecosystem Initiative with their goals and strategies. And we look forward to that engagement also and building of that relationship. Sorry, I do see a few questions in the chat. But first, I do notice that Lucas included the link to the article for the PLOS Water earlier in the chat. So if anyone's interested in that, you can take a look at that. And while Ian's answering a few questions, maybe in the chat, if anyone knows where that picture was taken that Ian had in when he was moving towards the Fraser Basin information, please put that in the chat and we'll see if anybody knows where that is. Okay, so Ian, the first question was from John, and it asked, Lucas talked about the NW portal. Does the concept of the freshwater hub connect with the portal that you guys are looking at doing?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, it definitely should. I don't envision that, the Canada Water Agency website is going to be the be all and end all for where people can find information about the Fraser River watershed and its sub-watersheds. I think at least at its initial stages, we'll try and do as good a job as we can of getting at some of those awareness issues of all the good things that are out there. So more about pointing to things like the Nechako Watershed Portal and some of its complements maybe in other areas as well, and really underscoring where there might be, I guess, opportunities for more collaboration and coordination both within the Nechako and outside. So short answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. The next question from Terry is, and these are some specific things about CWA, is Transport Canada part of the federal family working with CWA?
Again, short answer is yes, absolutely. They're probably top 5, I'd say. When it comes to the Canada Water Agency mandate with respect to sort of water quality management, I think we have a few more conversations with them around things like derelict vessels, and things like that. But absolutely, there's lots of conversations around where each department's priorities and jurisdiction lies in sort of the national context and how we can be working together for not just CWA's objectives, but for everybody's objectives for freshwater.
Yeah, so further, there was a question on, will there be discussions on restoring some of the lost navigable waters protections to river streams across the country?
I mean, not specifically right now, with respect to sort of like the super short-term work. It's absolutely an issue that remains on the table, obviously, in terms of, how we could go about that. I made allusion there to sort of political winds notwithstanding, and, those can take us in certain directions as well. So in any case, it's not off the table. Yes. Maybe the way to put it
Okay,
at this point.
and also from Terry, where will compliance and enforcement go?
Yeah, definitely. That's another group that is staying with ECCC at this stage. We're trying not to bite off too much more than we can chew with setting up a brand new agency. We'll see where the conversation goes in the coming years with respect to how all that water work within the federal family should or shouldn't be under the umbrella of the Canada Water Agency. But at this stage, it's definitely one of those things that's still with ECCC.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian, for your time this morning in presenting. So next, in discussion about the watershed governments, we have Zita Patello, sorry, Zita, Director of Watersheds BC. She will be presenting on the Indigenous Watersheds Initiative, so learnings in advancing Indigenous-led watershed security. Zita, I just want to make sure that you are being able to share your screen.
I'm working on it.
Okay, great.
Can you see that?
We can totally see it. Thank you.
So thank you for inviting me to be here today. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from Lekwungen speaking territory, and specifically the Saanich and WSÁNEĆ nations. And though the work of Watersheds BC is focused across the province, this is where I call home, and I'm grateful and acknowledge that the work that we do is trying to uplift nations and in recognition of their unceded rights. So with that, I will share a little bit about the Indigenous Watersheds Initiative, what it is, what we've been doing, what communities are doing across the province. So it's not specifically about governance, but sharing some of what has been happening. So the Indigenous Watersheds Initiative began in 2022, and it is with the support of $15 million of provincial funds. And it builds upon, so it's a 3-year initiative, and it builds upon the Healthy Watersheds Initiative. The focus of our work is on supporting watershed security, which is rooted in resilience, local values, and Indigenous stewardship. And there are several bodies who support this work. So Watersheds BC, in partnership with Make Way, which many of you will know is a charitable foundation that supports work across the country, but does a lot of work in British Columbia, and its origins are here on the West Coast. And then very significantly, a group of Indigenous advisors who were also part of the Healthy Watersheds Initiative, and they have been an integral part of the program design, in the granting process design, and in final grant making for the second round, which I'll get into in a little bit more detail. So here are some of the, or they're all of the Indigenous advisors. They all have a different background and bring different strengths to the work that we do. Some of them may be familiar to you, from Dina Machin, who's from the Okanagan Nation, who's done a lot of fisheries work that you may have encountered, to somebody closer to your region, which is Dr. Roger Williams, who is now chief in the Hanimate First Nation, to Gord Sterrett, who is from Upper Fraser Fisheries Alliance, who you may know as well, and Lana Lowe from Fort Nelson First Nation, among others. So we're very grateful for the time that they spend with us and their decision-making and advice. So I want to show a little bit of a background of this work for those of you who haven't heard of the Healthy Watersheds Initiative. It was really the biggest investment by the province, by any government, I will say, in about a generation. And so there was a $27 million endowment or investment that supported 69 projects across the province. The Indigenous leaders supported that work as well. It was delivered by REF BC in partnership with Watersheds BC as well. It's 61 projects. We have 49 with IWI, so I mixed up the second digit there. So based on the successes and the learnings from the Healthy Watersheds Initiative, IWI was designed to try and advance those learnings and implement what we had learned. So there were 2 rounds of funding. I'll get into the funding in a minute, but in terms of IWI, there are 49 projects across the province, and you'll see that there are blue dots and there are green dots, and that's because the blue dots are from the round 1 of funding, which was 21 projects, and then we had a round 2, which was 28 projects. So in total, they're across the province, and there are 49 projects that are underway. So there are several themes that the projects can be grouped under, and they address, many objectives. And as we all know, those of us who are in this water world, is that most of the issues we try to address intersect with others. And so the framing of these themes is really kind of the principal kind of work that the projects are doing, but with a clear recognition that they often are working on 2 or more of these topics, and that Indigenous sovereignty is ultimately at the center of this work. So there is fisheries and food sovereignty work, Indigenous knowledge and land-based learning, watershed planning and governance, restoration and protection, and monitoring and assessment. So this is how the projects fall out in terms of their major focus. And you'll notice that at the far end, the majority of projects are doing monitoring and assessment work, with some distribution across the other types of project themes. Now, this is probably some fine print for you to be reading, but I am sure that you will get the slides later on. But what this piece does, which you can also see in our interim report or this slide, is that it really, we really thought carefully about the kinds of themes that we were going to be using to categorize this work and to be able to talk about it and tell stories about the work. And so what you'll see in these descriptions is that there's a connection between Indigenous perspectives to what Western science, or many of us who work in this field, might consider. So rather than just thinking about the restoration and protection, for example, of watersheds, for Indigenous nations, those watersheds are a vital source of food and medicine and culture. And so the impacts of the resource extraction industries have had on that require that restoration and protection occur in order for them to be able to do that work again. And then wild salmon, for example, and freshwater fish and coastal species are significant and provide key food sources. And so there's obviously monitoring and restoration that needs to happen as a result of that. So these are the themes that we, which were informed by both our applicants in discussions and also by the Indigenous advisors. So I want to frame a little bit about the process and eligibility for this work. As I mentioned, there are 2 rounds. And the first round really focused on keeping momentum going with the Healthy Watersheds Initiative projects. Because of the way the funding rolled out, we wanted to do this rather quickly and keep momentum moving. So most of those projects were connected to the Healthy Watersheds Initiative or a partner. In the second round, we were able to implement some of the learnings around the Healthy Watersheds Initiative, which included having an open call for applications, really trying to prioritize geographic equity because there wasn't a lot of projects in the north in the first round, and also ones that just hadn't received any funding from this body of resources. So in this part of the granting, the Indigenous advisors were critical in terms of the shortlisting and the final decision making for these grants. So this is just a little excerpt from a project description that you can see on the Indigenous Watersheds Initiative website, which tells a little bit about the work that's happening. This particular one from the Stakea Learning Society is focusing on some restoration work they're located on Salt Spring Island, and also a Gary Oak Meadow and the food sources that are associated with that. And it's a learning center as well for community members and Indigenous community members. And it really has been able to do a lot of training and engagement with youth, staff, and community members. So it's a really incredible project. I had the great privilege of being able to visit and see some of the work that's happening there. So if you go to our website, you can see a little excerpt like this of all of the 49 projects. So here are a couple of examples of project work that's happening across the themes that I mentioned. This is one example from UFFCA where we have a technician who is doing some water sampling on the Nechako, and another which is on the left, the Weiweikai Guardians program, and they are doing some incredible work in terms of both training and being out on the land and doing monitoring and assessment work. So in terms of the restoration activities that are underway, you will see that there is a lot of work happening around aquatic and wetland restoration. There is replanting happening. There's habitat reconstruction. There is work happening around road deactivation and debris removal. So a variety of activities underway in this body of work. The numbers are preliminary right now in terms of our metrics because we have had a couple of rounds of interim reports. These are the ones that I can say with confidence, so I can share them with you today. But that there's restoration happening across 58 sites and 28 species are being monitored. So 80% of the teams have some kind of restoration activities underway. There's a lot of monitoring happening, and you'll recall that that it's the majority of activity that is happening for 15 of the projects. So there are all kinds of things being monitored, and we know that this monitoring activity that's being undertaken is usually informing some type of planning and or drought management or forest fire kind of prevention management. So it's important information that they're getting about their territories. So from a water quality perspective, all of the parameters that you would anticipate from turbidity, temperature, pH, to a variety of rich projects in fish and wildlife, from migration and size, counting, to creating databases and training staff on water monitoring practices and database management in some cases as well. There's some really sophisticated work that some of you may be familiar with that's happening up with the Upper Fraser fisheries teams and communities there. And the other really important part is, of course, identifying culturally significant areas. So we're also looking at the economic benefits and outcomes as a result of this work. So this is a bit of a chart that shows you some of the jobs that are being supported and where. The really significant part of these findings is that many of the people who are being employed are in community. We know that a lot of this work requires expertise, whether it be hydrological, in some cases, or geological engineers, to restoration specialists, to fisheries biologists, and some communities don't have that and have to bring consultants in. But an important part of the focus of our work is ensuring that community members are part of the work. And many of the teams really have an enormous focus, accountability, and responsibility to their community members, and ensuring that they understand what's happening and kind of bringing them along. And in many cases, if this work can influence or inform decision-making that the community is making in relation to a number of factors, from economic activities to natural resource extraction or work that may be happening in the territory. So you may recall from the themes that there is a focus on land-based learning. And so these are some of the other areas that we had feedback from in the reporting about incorporating Indigenous languages to their work, to drawing on Indigenous laws or traditional ecological knowledge to guide the project, engaging youth explicitly. Many of the projects have a youth or intergenerational component to the work, but some of them are employing them more explicitly or working more explicitly with youth. So in terms of the overall initiative, we also had heard that an important part of what was desired by communities was an opportunity for peer-to-peer learning. And so to respond to that, we've had both webinars and some regional gatherings, in-person gatherings. The webinars were driven by topics that project teams had requested, and those invitations went out to all the nations across the province, not just project teams. So they were open. They're available on the IWI YouTube channel. You can get to it through our website if you're interested in them. And the in-person gatherings were a chance for people to meet together on a regional basis to understand who's doing what in neighboring watersheds, and to talk through some of the challenges and learnings that they've been having in the work that they're doing in their communities and their projects. So some of the challenges that we've heard of, which are probably similar to work that's happening in the Nechako and other watersheds across the province, is the rising costs of doing the work, from salaries to equipment costs and rentals to materials for doing the work. And when you have delays in doing the project, whether it's a result of not being able to get the people on the ground when you want, to not getting another point that's on here, the permits that you need, that we're seeing inflation really impacting the cost of this work. Secondly is staffing and resources. Getting expertise or the right people in the right place is really critical. And I think, as many of you probably know, in a lot of northern communities in particular, that can be a real challenge of getting people to stay in community, to stay in remote areas of the community, and to have ongoing employment with a level of expertise. And that relates to some of the funding that is kind of on and off often in this work. Thirdly, permits and the regulatory environment is not designed to streamline, in particular, restoration work. And that's something that's shared not only by Indigenous communities, but by everybody in the field of doing that kind of work. So we are doing some advocacy work with other organizations across the province to address that and bring that to the attention of government. The impacts of climate change, again, are not unique to the projects in this as part of this initiative, but from fires, floods, drought, sometimes all three, to other issues that are impacting Indigenous communities, from deaths in communities to other pressures in relation to housing or other social issues that really are become really significant to people who are doing this work on the ground in their communities, and their additional pressures that they're feeling. And then finally, another really significant challenge that was clear in this work, particularly as we try to expand geographic reach, is that there are many territories that are very difficult to access and extremely expensive to access. So there sometimes are community members that haven't been to certain parts of the territory where they may have traditionally hunted or fished or gathered foods and medicines, because it's prohibitive to get into those communities. And so as supporters of that work, the costs associated with them can be really significant. So I want to talk a little bit about the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Some of you may have seen this report that was produced as part of the Healthy Watersheds Initiative. It was done by Tara Marsden, who was the Senior Indigenous Advisor of the program, who has a consulting company called Himlu, and who is from Gitnya, who is a Gitnya woman. And it's a really incredible piece of work if you haven't seen it. And it is an example of really looking at our work and the project work and how it is actually advancing or supporting the implementation of UNDRIP. So this is something that we have incorporated into the learnings of this, and a consciousness around how are we supporting this very explicitly in our work. So I encourage you to look at the report if you haven't seen it yet. There's 2 versions. You can get a sort of shorter executive version and then the appendices with all the results. So in terms of the project teams, obviously Indigenous communities leading and doing the work is already, I think, a reflection of moving and advancing some of the principles and articles of UNDRIP. But our preliminary assessment of looking at how project groups are doing that is that it's helping them to uphold their rights and sovereignty, and I've identified some of the articles and ways that they're doing that. It's really important to recognize that nations having their own information and data is a critical part, and data sovereignty is a really critical part of allowing them to engage in decision-making and or in G2G relationships with information that they feel is theirs and reflective of the reality and incorporates traditional knowledge. So I want to share some of the perspectives that have informed our approach to doing this work. And that is that it's one thing to, whatever the case might be in terms of the work that you're doing in your communities, but your ultimate objective of the what that you have, in this case, money to share and to distribute to communities, is how you do that is as important as what you're trying to achieve. And so that really informed the ways in which we do all of our work. And one of that is sort of stepping out of your shoes and ensuring that that you're not putting your timeline, your critical path ahead of communities' perspectives. And one of the things I think is really different, that you probably are all quite aware of, is that the Western perspective is not as integral. All of the silos that we have created in our colonial systems do not integrate the challenges that we see happening in watersheds, and the governance of those watersheds is absolutely not integral. And some of what Ian shared with us in his presentation really made it clear that there are explicit ways that you're trying to break down some of those silos across the water agency. And we see that on the landscape as well. So it's really important to understand that your, Indigenous communities or partners that you're working with generally have a very integrated lens. Geography is really significant, and it makes a big difference on the way that work can be done, on accessibility, and in the ways that communities may or may not be able to work with you on projects. Capacity is a really significant challenge because community members, I mean, for a variety of reasons, but one of which is that, those of you that have interacted with any kind of land managers in your Indigenous communities know that, or even, members of those land and management teams or watershed teams, if the community has one, usually have about 6 jobs. And are really pulled in many directions. So there's everything from that to being able to, as I talked about before, fill the roles. And they're really just trying to do a lot, and everybody wants to knock on their door. I think really post-DRIPA and with the awareness of people wanting to do the right thing, but it puts a lot of pressure on communities. Again, that kind of holistic vision for ecological, cultural, human, and economic health has been really key in the way that we are doing our work, ensuring we're supporting all of those and ensuring that in our work, it's not, remembering it's not about you, and it's about strengthening communities from within and helping to heal relationships with the land and water. So some of the funding reflections are pretty self-explanatory. I think for those of you that look for funding regularly, is that there's a clear need for multi-year funding, that often that funding is very siloed, that core supports for just staff having funding available for staff and general operations and planning can often be a challenge. That capital and equipment costs are often a challenge to fund, and there are restrictions on those things. There's still not regional equity as much as we tried in this work. And some of that is because it's forging relationships with communities, and in those more remote communities, it's harder to get into them and build trust in those and the relationships you need in order to do good work together. It's really critical to have Indigenous decision-making spaces for these kinds of funds, and we try to do that through the granting decision making, and that growing the Watershed Security Fund, I didn't get into that, is a really critical part of this work in order to advance the good work that's happening on the ground. So with that, that was a really quick fire hose of the work that's happening, but I hope that that's helpful and gives you a very general overview of the work that we've been doing.
Zita, thank you so much for your presentation on the reflections from the Indigenous Watershed Initiatives. I definitely look forward to going to the website and reading about those 49 projects. The images are beautiful already from your presentation, so I also look forward to that, and maybe taking a look at those webinars that are on there. You will note that I did put a reference to the Healthy Watershed Initiative report by Tara Marsden in the chat for those of you who would like to take a look at that. And I think that it's really important to sort of, for us to also be reflecting on those challenges and perspectives that you've noted during the presentation, and how those would be critical to understand, or at least begin to understand in building our relationships. Well, we're at 10:28, everyone. So we are now going into, oh, sorry, I see a quick question here. Zita from Kim, can you please share examples of projects that amplify the shared perspectives that you talked about and what made them a success? So share some examples of projects that exemplify the shared perspectives that you talked about and what made them a success.
Well, I think that, I mean, it's a pretty general question, but I would say that essentially all of the projects, I think, have because they're Indigenous led, that they are working, first of all, they are driven by community priorities. And so as a result of that, they embody those kind of integrated principles that I talked about, and where, yeah, and I would say some of, for example, the Weiwei Kai, the picture that I showed you about the Weiwei Kai work, which is a Guardians program. So there's, I think something that's really important about it is that it has both training and education for community members, and also it allows them to be out on the land doing the work that is, whether it's restoration work or monitoring work or kind of surveillance work about other projects that are happening in the territory, that they're able to be out there and be the eyes and the ears out there on the ground. I'll go back to the UFFCA project where they're doing this incredible and very sophisticated monitoring, hydrological monitoring program. They've put in a number of new stations. They maintain them. They're state of the art. And then they are also working with a database that is, again, really progressive. And they are, it's women actually mostly who are leading some of this work, are just doing an incredible job of collecting data for the water management systems in their territory. And that's a really remarkable thing. There are many parts of the province that are not doing this. And then I'll flag quickly a support for the Coxsila water sustainability planning process, which is more of a governance focused project where they are developing a framework for dealing with both drought and fish and industry's needs on this particular watershed. And it is being that the Cowichan tribes play a really significant role in that work with the province. So those are a few little tidbits. I hope that helps, but I think it's important to remember when it's led by community and their priorities, then it is kind of embodying many of those principles.
Excellent. Thank you, Zita. Okay, we will now be going into a break till 10:45. I will be turning over the chairing of the meeting to Kim Menounos after the break. So I want to thank everybody for being here along the way this morning. And then we are back on at 10:45, where we will be going into a panel discussion about British Columbia watersheds, and we'll have presentations and discussion on the successes, insights, and considerations on how BC's watershed groups can work together towards a shared goal of keeping BC's watersheds healthy. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you back here at 10:45.
Much to all the speakers and to Gina for chairing the first part of the meeting this morning. As she mentioned, Gina and I are co-chairs of the Nechako Watershed Roundtable, and I work with the Fraser Basin Council, so I'm a member on the core committee, and work closely with Gina on setting up the annual meeting, and was really pleased to have her be able to chair the first part, and then you'll see me mostly for the second part. So, so welcome from me to everyone, and there's a little bit of behind the scenes here. I'm just checking in with Corey that you are that you can see us and hear us, and I will introduce you in just a second.
I am good over here, Kim. Thank you.
Terrific. All right. So if you can put a spotlight on Corey for me, Lindsay. And then I'm honored to introduce Corey to you. Corey's going to start with a bit of a presentation about her organization, the BC Watershed Security Coalition, and then lead us through a panel discussion about governance, successes, insights, and considerations on how BC's watershed groups can work together towards a shared goal of keeping BC's watersheds healthy. So I know that's why we're all doing this incredible water work, and I'm thrilled and excited to be connecting with all of you today. And so I'm going to turn it over to Corey. Thanks very much for being here, Corey.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. I appreciate being here, and I appreciate being invited to be a part of today's meeting and important discussion and opportunity to connect with some known partners and colleagues and friends in this water world, and also a chance to learn from and meet some new people. So thank you. Yeah, as Kim mentioned, my name's Corey Tell. I'm joining you today as the chair of the BC Watershed Security Coalition, and I just want to acknowledge that I am joining you today from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh in the China Creek Urban Watershed, which is also known as East Vancouver. And I just want to recognize that I am a guest on these lands, and I'm deeply grateful for the relationship that I've been able to foster here with the community, the land, and the water, and I offer my respect to their peoples past and present. So we have an exciting conversation and discussion that is about to happen, as Kim mentioned. And so, yeah, I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the work of the BC Watershed Security Coalition and some of the things we've been pushing for and advocating on, and what opportunity there is right now for BC water organizations and water leaders and champions to really come together to move this work forward. So I've got an exciting campaign that we've just launched that I want to share with you. And then we will be then pivoting over to hear from 3 other presentations. And so we'll be hearing from Rona Martin, who's the chair of the Shuswap Watershed Council. And we'll hear from Paula Swick, who's the executive director of the Mackenzie River Basin Board, and then we'll hear again from Kim, who obviously is the co-chair of the Nechako Watershed Board or Roundtable. And these 3 are really going to speak to the important work that they're doing in their watersheds around advancing this planning, management, and stewardship, and governance solutions to move BC's watershed health and security forward, and working together. So there will be an opportunity to have questions asked of all 4 of us as following our presentations. There will be a sort of question and answer period that I will lead with Rona, Paula, and Kim following their presentations. But if you do have questions that come up during the presentations, please put them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we can get to as many of those questions as possible in the follow-up of the discussion. So with that, I'm going to just switch over here to my slides. So give me one moment, please. Great. Can I just get a thumbs up if you can see that and it looks good? And awesome. Thank you so much. You would think after this much time, we would all be like just complete experts on Zoom and sharing screens, but you never know. So thank you very much. So as I mentioned, I'm the chair of the BC Watershed Security Coalition, and I work with an amazing group of people on our steering committee and our members across the province. And so I'm really fortunate to be able to come and connect with you folks and share a little bit about the work that this coalition collectively has been doing together. And so since our inception in 2020, the Watershed Security Coalition's work has really been grounded in the recognition that the future security of BC really depends on healthy functioning watersheds. And these watersheds that sustain our livelihoods, our food security, our salmon habitats, community prosperity, and ultimately all living things. Our work as a coalition is with all levels of government. And we do this through constructive solutions focused dialogue in order to keep watershed security and freshwater really at the forefront of the political agenda, and to really drive the action and the benefits that we know are needed in communities that we hear from our members and other community partners. So really quickly, we're nonpartisan, we're diverse, we have over 50 members. These are some of our members here. The Nechako Watershed Roundtable is one of our members, and we have some other members on the calls as well. And but we're really made up of community water experts and leaders in the field. This includes farmers, Indigenous champions, local governments, and various different NGOs. And collectively, as a coalition, we represent over 255,000 British Columbians from all walks of life and every corner of the province. So I know I'm talking to allies and folks working in this water world, but I always think it's so important when we talk about watershed security, like to actually define what does that mean? Because I think if we asked every person on this call, we might get a different answer. And so when I talk about watershed security, when our coalition talks about watershed security, we are talking about access to clean drinking water, a basic human right, healthy and sustainable fish populations, restored watersheds, thriving local economies with local jobs that allow people to stay in their communities. We're talking about government to government partnerships that enable better watershed decision making, and then ultimately healthy, resilient communities that result from this, and watersheds that support our economic, social, and cultural practices in our communities across the province. In our work as a coalition, we really strive to advance watershed security through the actions that are needed so that our watersheds can continue to provide that benefit. And we see three really key pathways in our work to advance watershed security, and one significant enabling condition. And so strengthening local watershed governance, which I'm sure is a big conversation that happens around this group of people. But that's really around, how do we break down the existing silos so that the planning decisions can really be made at that right scale and according to the priorities that are set by the people that live in those watersheds and ultimately know them best. The second around rebuilding our natural defenses and infrastructure. That's of course our watersheds. So it's our forests, our wetlands, our stream banks, and really is that first line of defense against the climate crisis and allowing them to do their job. Slow water down, hold it on the land, replenish our aquifers, reservoirs so that we can access it and use it when we need it most in these long, hot, dry spells and droughts that are becoming far more frequent in British Columbia. And then the third is around collaborative monitoring. So we can't effectively manage what we don't measure. And collaborative monitoring that's really grounded in both Indigenous knowledge and Western science is the only way that we can ensure that we are making those right decisions at the right time. And then that enabling condition I mentioned, of course, long-term sustainable funding is really critical in order to support the work that needs to happen to advance this forward. So we've all seen in the past several years this cycle of water disasters, and I know it's come up on the call already today. And you're experiencing it in your communities. You're working to actively move through it. And this multi-year drought, these devastating wildfires, and the flooding is challenging. Obviously, the work that we collectively are trying to do, but this is an opportunity to try to get ahead of it. We've had poorly planned development over the past 20 years that has really worsened the impacts of these climate disasters that we're seeing, which is leaving our communities across the province really vulnerable. And we know now through some public opinion polling that we've been conducting that 2/3 of British Columbians, fear that a major water crisis is in the near future in their community. And so, across the board, from our members, from partners, from champions, these key messages we continue to hear are just that the challenges are growing. The costs are continuing to rise, whether that's to respond to the crises or for the cost of actually doing the work. And we heard Zita mention that in her presentation. And the other piece there is just that many communities, whether you're local government, a regional district, or you're a watershed table or organization doing this work, is at the constant state of responding to some of these crises with limited bandwidth and capability to do that preventative planning work to get ahead. So we can't take our watersheds for granted ultimately. So what do we need to do? And this ties in to the work that we're going to continue to talk about, which is, we need to start winning on water. And to do this, we need to work together in our communities and across our communities. And this allows us to set a new picture and create a new path forward. And so, in BC, we have an opportunity to move from division and conflict to collaborative solutions. And so, we haven't seen a ton of division over water yet in the province, but we have seen it in communities. And when we look globally, we are seeing that in a lot more places. And so when we win on water, it allows us to move past this. We have enough water in British Columbia, but we do need to manage it better, and that's essential. And, in 2023, when droughts impacted the entire province, in the Salmon River watershed, we saw division and conflict over access to water. In contrast, we have communities like the Cowichan, and even up in the Nechako, where same protection orders that were demonstrated, but through collaborative problem solving, there was reduced polarization, less conflict, and there was also a recognition of First Nations authorities in these communities, and local people felt that they were really included and empowered through these processes. Winning on water allows us to move from this reaction to the crises and move into proactive planning and action. And so as I meet with partners, as I meet with coalition members and local electeds across the province, people are seeking systems and the ability to really move beyond a piecemeal reaction to each crisis. And they want the stability and security that comes with that necessary planning to get ahead of these droughts and wildfires and floods in their communities. And then the third is really around moving from overwhelm and hope. And so, the climate change has disrupted our water cycle in the province, and we're seeing this in real time. But it is creating this domino effect, which does present fear and uncertainty for the future for British Columbians. And we're seeing that in polling, and we're seeing this crop up in other conversations around the future. But what we know is that these crises they're not necessarily going away, but we do know that a different future is possible. And by supporting local watershed projects and local watershed groups that can come together, work together, do this planning, a different future is possible that demonstrates that sort of transformative power of community action at the watershed level. And we've already started to see this through some of the amazing work that has been funded since 2021 through the Healthy Watersheds Initiative, through the Indigenous Watersheds Initiative, and we'll continue to see that through the funding that is starting to roll out through the Watershed Security Fund. But the two key actions that we need to start to see momentum on, and we need to continue to see bold leadership and action on when it comes to this important path of winning on water together, is around establishing a system of province-wide watershed boards and increasing investments in local watershed projects. And so when we invest in watershed security, we know that we need long-term predictable funding in order to build the community resilience against these crises. And so I know Zita mentioned that we've seen the $100 million that kickstarted the Watershed Security Fund, and this is a really important start. But we also know that this fund has been set up as an endowment, which is important because that can create that long-term sustainable funding. And it's being co-developed with the First Nations Water Caucus, which is like precedent setting, and it's a really important step forward for water investments and water funding in the province. But that $100 million can only provide, $5 to $7 million annually right now, and we need to grow it to $1 billion, which can provide 75 to 100 million annually into important water project works across the province. And this funding, of course, can support these local watershed initiatives, like the work you folks are doing in your communities, including the creation of watershed boards, which can leverage these real local expertise and resources to solve these challenges, create good jobs, and build these healthier, stronger communities that we need. We also know that 78% of British Columbians support additional investments in watersheds to ensure that they've got healthy and secure communities and fresh water. So the other piece is around that accelerating watershed governance and planning. And so that's where, as the BC Watershed Security Coalition, we've been calling for this system of watershed boards in the province. BC is one of the only provinces that doesn't have a system of local watershed boards, unlike other provinces and territories across the province. They may not be called watershed boards, but they do have a system. And so we need this system of boards to really empower communities to be able to facilitate the cooperation, the planning, and decision-making at the right scale. And so for us to move forward collectively and build on sort of the work that's happened to date, to build momentum and do the work around watersheds in the province, we really need to continue this progress, and we need to continue to call on our elected leaders to prioritize bold action and leadership when it comes to freshwater. And so I'm really excited right now to share the Provincial Watershed Security Pledge that the Watershed Security Coalition has launched. And so this past Sunday was BC and World Rivers Day. And so we launched the Watershed Security Pledge as part of this provincial election as an opportunity for the water community and all British Columbians to really come together and it call on all candidates running in the provincial election to ensure that parties and candidates are really recognizing the critical importance of watershed security to British Columbians, and that, you know, they're taking this commitment for the health and well-being of our province, our economic stability, and of local communities. And so we've kept our pledge, you know, intentionally higher level so that there's, you know, an easy ask and an easy yes of candidates. And when we talk about, you know, the theme of this conversation right now around how do, you know, BC watershed groups work together to ensure healthy watersheds, we need to ensure that we have, you know, provincial actions that are going to enhance the local watershed management and partnerships. So it's not just partnerships between the province and communities, but it's to ensure that communities can partner with each other as well to really unite and develop these solutions that benefit everyone. And then, of course, there's that investment piece around investing in watershed security so that people have those tools and resources to do the work in their local watersheds that's needed. And so we've put out the call to candidates to sign our pledge. We put out the ask to candidates just yesterday, and so we've started to see some pledges start to roll in, which is great. On our website, watershedsecurity.ca/pledge, or just watershedsecurity.ca, you can track and see where all of your local candidates stand, if they've signed the pledge. If they haven't, you can send them a message asking them to sign the pledge for watershed security. If they have, you can send them a message thanking them for doing that. On the website, we also have like a learn more section, which digs into sort of this investment piece that I spoke about. It digs into the need for watershed boards across the province and the need around really growing and building the watershed sector across BC. So I hope that collectively together across the province, we can really elevate the local watershed challenges, but solutions in our communities. And so that our candidates understand that and can really see some bold commitments to keep this momentum on water and watershed security in the province moving forward. And I'll just leave you with this. You all know the role of like healthy watersheds in our communities. I don't need to share that with you. And so, but what I do know is that this is what's possible. What you see on the screen here, this is what's possible when communities work together and we plan for the water future that we want and the water future that we need in our communities. So I hope that together we can keep this important work going forward. And I'm really excited for the next conversation here and learning from others that are doing this really important work in their community that we need to continue to see moving forward. So thank you. So I'll stop my screen here now. So I'm happy, of course, to answer any questions about our pledge, but also if you are interested in learning more about the Watershed Security Coalition, of course, happy to talk more about that. So now let's pivot over to hear from some of our other presenters. So let me grab my notes here. Here we go. And so, yeah, just a reminder, if you do have questions, put them in the chat. And I just want to thank Lindsay for tracking that for us. So Lindsay's keeping track of all the questions so we can make sure that those can get answered in the time we have allotted at the end of the presentation. So let's move into our first presentation. And so as Kim mentioned at the very beginning, right now we're going to talk about sort of the exciting and essential work that's being led to advance watershed planning and management and stewardship and governance in watersheds across BC. And and more, I should say, with one of our panelists. And yeah, so let's dig in and learn together around how these partnerships and collaborations are really driving these meaningful solutions. So first up, we have Rona Martin, who is the chair of the Shuswap Watershed Council. And so Rona is she's been a member of the Shuswap Watershed Council since its inception in 2014, and she's provided strategic direction to the council's work on water quality, monitoring and protection, invasive mussels prevention, advocacy, and more. And so Rona is an elected member of the Columbia Shuswap Regional District Board of Directors since 1990. And she's also served on the Union of BC Municipalities and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And she lives in the Malaqua in the eastern region of the Shuswap watershed, close to the beautiful Eagle River. So Rona, over to you. I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. I come from the Secwepemc territory, and I'm very grateful to be here and share the territory with them, and always look forward to learning opportunities from them. So when we had our little pre-meeting, we talked about governance of water, and I talked about how we got started. And when we started looking after water in our region, we started with something that was called the Shuswap Lake Integrated Planning Process. And this is a lesson in what not to do, because what ended up happening is that a lot of issues were being identified, and they were issues that were actually the responsibility of senior levels of government, and it entailed people having to do things that they didn't want to do. So we were not getting any successes really out there, and we weren't making any friends. So the Shuswap Lake Integrated Planning Process folded, and the Shuswap Watershed Council was formed. Now, we are very, very fortunate. Right from the beginning, we've had great collaboration. We have representation from the North Okanagan Regional District, from the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, from our Indigenous communities. We have even funding from some of our Indigenous communities. They're right at the table providing their input and their knowledge, which has been very, very, very helpful. We have, of course, always challenges. And it's hard. You keep talking about core funding and how important that is, and that is something that we struggled with, because, as you all know, funding is essential to do everything, and there's the list of projects just keeps growing and growing. So if I talk about our successes, we have a very diverse council. We have elected representatives from the regional district boards. We have community representatives. We've had provincial representatives from various agencies, and they have provided a solid knowledge. Dennis Einerson has been with us since the beginning, and I mean, he is an encyclopedia all on his own, and so we've been very fortunate to even drag him back in after his retirement. He is still a member of our organization because the Shuswap has meant so much to him. We have different roles and responsibilities along the watershed and within the watershed, but to all of us, the lake is the common theme that pulls us all together. We've done the work to identify what the greatest threats are to our local water supply. We've partnered with UBC Okanagan and a student there that did some work on nutrient loading and what we all suspected, but they were able to provide us the knowledge to go forward with, which was really great. Right now in our organization, just to back up a minute, when we set up the Shuswap Lake Watershed Council, we set it up as a pilot project for 5 years. And then COVID happened, so we were able to extend that for a couple of more years. We went out to referendum, and currently what people were paying was $10 a year on their property taxes. It was a parcel tax, so every home, no matter what they used or where they were located, was paying $10 a year. We went to referendum and it didn't get supported. So right now, our watershed council is in the midst of a real dilemma. We met just a short time ago and our membership is wanting to carry on. It won't be the same. It won't be supported the way that it has been through the parcel tax funding from the CSRD. The Thompson-Nicola Regional District has continued to support. We are waiting to see if Salmon Arm will support, and some of the rural directors may kick in some money from their discretionary funds. But we are facing a real challenge. Some of our members, because it's not a CSRD function, will not even be able to be there anymore because of their job. They won't get the time off of their job. So we have a lot of commitment. We have a lot of enthusiasm from those that are there. The knowledge that I can share with you is how important it is to make sure that you have good communication going out to your people. And by your people, I mean your public. Because at the end of the day, it's the public that ends up supporting the financing through taxation, either at the local or the provincial or the federal level. And if you have people within your communities that are willing to support your organization by contacting their MLAs or their members of council, that is a really good thing. It takes time to get accurate information out there. And I think you always have to have somebody out there listening to make sure that you don't have a bunch of misinformation out there. Because really, I think that is what killed us, is misinformation. People thought that in some cases, we were going to be asking them to put water meters on their own private wells, applying for licenses and things like that. So I think communication does not cost a lot of money, but it is really, really important. I don't think I can stress that enough, that it's really, really important. We've been involved in some really exciting projects in our communities. And so the people that have been involved with those projects with us, of course, they support us and they see the value, because what they've been able to do on their properties has been a positive impact on the whole water system. And I think that in that case, that is also a great way of communication. I think our goals for next year is to try and make sure that our transition is smooth and it's solid, and that we can carry on doing the work that we're doing. I think that the thing that we need assistance with now is to make sure that we can find some method of getting secure funding. Like all of you there, we will be applying for grants to go forward into the future. And, I don't like the idea of competing with all of you, but because everybody's project is important in their region and it all contributes to, going into a bigger system one place or another, but that's what we will be faced with. We've learned a lot through this process. We've learned to listen to people. We've learned to go out onto the land and see actually what they're talking about. And to me, that's been one of the greatest values of this whole organization is when you sit in your own little silo looking at things, you're only isolating yourself into one skill set. And so with the projects that we've been involved with at our Watershed Council, we've been able to learn so much, especially in regards to agriculture and some of the fine work that agriculture has been doing. It's very easy to point a finger at what we perceive to be a cause of an issue that's happening to our watershed. But I think what I've learned is that you also have to reach out and say, okay, yes, this is an issue, and can you please tell me what you've been doing or how you plan to change some of the things that you are doing. And we've had a grant program going for several years now where we've assisted some of our local property owners in doing some works that will help preserve our water. And to me, that's been one of the best learning experiences that I have ever been involved with. You know, it broke my heart when our referendum failed, because how many of us spend $10 a week on coffee? And, you know, we have thousands of people that drink out of Shuswap Lake. And it just is sad that $10 was felt to be too much to preserve the water system. So I'm open to questions. I think Erin Vieira, who is works for Fraser Basin Council, and she organizes things for us. If she is willing to, she can answer some questions or could add a little bit to this. You know, 10 minutes is not much to bring a lot of information to you when you've been doing it for quite a few years. But I think that the best thing for me to tell you is to make sure that you have clear communication going out to your people, because that way you can build solid support within your communities. And when people in your communities support you, they will take the message forward. So thank you very much for
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rona, for sharing about this important work that you folks have been doing, and also some of the challenges of doing this work at the local level. And I'm excited for us to be able to dig into a little bit of this more after our other presentations here. And just a reminder also to those on the call, if you have questions for Rona, please put them in the chat so we can keep a running list of those questions. So thank you again, Rona. I'd like to now pass over the panel screen to Paula Swick, who's the Executive Director of the Mackenzie River Basin Board. And so Paula has been working in the aquatic ecology field for over 25 years and has spent most of her career with Environment and Climate Change Canada. And Paula has been supporting the Mackenzie River Basin Board as the Executive Director since 2019. And she is very grateful to have the opportunity to work with leaders that are passionate about water in the Mackenzie River Basin. So she currently lives in Edmonton with her family and enjoys spending time in the North Saskatchewan River Valley. Paula, over to you.
Thank you. Can you see my slide? Thank you. Yeah, I know we should be good at this by now, but every single time it's what's going to go wrong. Thank you. It's fascinating. I've really appreciated being part of this meeting. I've learned a lot this morning, and I look forward to participating in this panel. So yes, my name is Paula. I'm the Executive Director of the Mackenzie River Basin Board, and I'm coming to you today from Edmonton, Alberta, which is on Treaty 6 territory. And I want to acknowledge the First Nations peoples, the Métis and the Inuit, who have lived and currently live on this land and have taken care of it for thousands of years. Nope, hang on. Now can I advance? Yay. Great. I always try to start my talks about the Mackenzie River Basin Board with this map, because it just gives an idea of the landscape that we're talking about. And the lakes and rivers of the Mackenzie River Basin have many names. I'm going to be just using one of the names for these rivers and lakes during my talk today. But those names were given to these water bodies by the Indigenous peoples who live, again, and have lived in the Mackenzie River Basin for thousands of years, since time immemorial. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. The water of the Mackenzie River Basin start in the mountains. The Peace and the Athabasca flow north and east until they converge to into the Peace Athabasca Delta, which I will try to show you. Here we go, with my pointer. And the Peace Athabasca Delta is a land of many lakes and wetlands, and it's a complicated system, very dynamic. But from there, the water generally moves north as the Slave River, and the Slave River moves into Great Slave Lake. At Great Slave Lake, that river is joined by other major tributaries such as the Hay, the Tolston, and the Lockhart. The Mackenzie River flows out of Great Slave Lake, where it is joined by water from the Liard Basin, the Peel Basin, and Great Bear Lake on its way to the Arctic Ocean. Once it reaches the Mackenzie Delta, it meets the Beaufort Sea. There we go. The Mackenzie River Basin Transboundary Waters Master Agreement was signed by the governments of Canada, British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Yukon, and Northwest Territories in 1997. It's a Water Act agreement, which means the Water Act is the legislation that governs or is the umbrella where the agreement sits. The purpose of the agreement was to establish common principles for the cooperative management of the aquatic ecosystem in the Mackenzie River Basin, establish the Mackenzie River Basin Board, and to make provisions for bilateral water management agreements. And this was a bit different for the time because there are other water boards under the Water Act, but at this point in time, most of them involved water flowing from A to B to C. So it was sort of an east-west flow, or maybe only two provinces and territories involved. And the focus was very much on water quantity. So how much water was flowing from A to B to C. The Mackenzie River Basin Transboundary Waters Master Agreement was really the first time from a Water Act perspective where aquatic ecosystem health was written into the agreement. Excuse me, I just need to get a drink. The vision for the board, the Mackenzie River Basin Board, is of a healthy and diverse aquatic ecosystem for the benefit of present and future generations. And that is what attracted me to working with the board. And for the purposes of the talk today, I'm going to focus on 3 areas of work. I'm going to touch briefly on the board itself and its role in providing strategic direction and sharing information at that board table position. I'm going to talk a little bit about the bilateral water management agreements because, again, they are a unique piece, but a really important piece in terms of establishing local or place-based conversations around data and information and knowledge in this vast landscape. And the State of the Aquatic Ecosystem Report, which provides basin-wide information. So up on that circle here, the yellow one, the Mackenzie River Basin Board has 13 members. There's 1 Indigenous member and 1 government member from each of the 5 provinces and territories in the basin. And there are 3 government members. Those members come from Environment and Climate Change Canada, Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, and the Parks Canada Agency. The signatories to the master agreement make equal annual financial contributions that all go into one fund that's managed by Environment Canada. And that funds the work of the board, it funds my salary. So it's a joint project right from the get-go. The MRBB Secretariat is housed within Environment and Climate Change Canada and is 1 permanent employee. But that said, I do a lot of outreach and work with consultants or inform collaborative partnerships. I get support from the provinces and territories or other government departments to advance the priorities of the board. So I'm not really alone. I'm just the only one whose salary is paid for by the board. The board is very much focused right now on strategic planning. The board meets twice per year. So things sometimes move slowly, but this is an important piece of work. And so it was felt we needed to take the time to get it as close to right as we can. This strategic planning exercise kicked off in 2023 at an in-person meeting in Fort St. John. And we really established the foundations for what our plan would be built upon. And that is reconciliation, climate change, social health and well-being, communication, education, and outreach. So to Director Rona Martin's point, very important and something the board really needs to strengthen. And then strategic investments and partnerships. And strategic because, as I mentioned, like the board itself doesn't have a lot of money, but we can start to maybe try to connect places where those that have funds can be better connected and to those that need support. So the second of the three areas I wanted to talk about are the bilateral water management agreements. So given that water is moving all over between provinces and territories in this basin, there was a desire to have a mechanism for, so there's more local or place-based conversations. So these bilateral water management agreements really focus on a relatively narrow geography where water passes from one province or territory into another. That said, that was the vision when they were first signed, but some have increased in scope and are taking a more holistic and broader view of how to approach the water in certain subbasins in the Mackenzie. So 4 bilateral water management agreements have been signed to date. They are the agreements between BC and Yukon, BC and Northwest Territories, Alberta and the Northwest Territories, and the Yukon and Northwest Territories. Agreements between BC and Alberta, Saskatchewan and Northwest Territories, and Saskatchewan and Alberta have been drafted, and there's a lot of conversation about those right now. And the agreements that have been signed to date have 2 things in common. One is that they use the risk-informed approach to prioritize work, because again, there's the acknowledgement that this is a very large basin, and any one of these subbasins are equally as, from a geographic perspective, large. So there's a lot of potential work to do. And the other commonality between them is the bilateral management committees. And so these are committees that include members of communities or Indigenous governments that are in the area, as well as provincial or territorial government representatives. So I don't sit at these tables per se, nor does the federal government. So I'm going to share one example of some current work that's going on under these bilateral water management agreement umbrellas, but there are a lot more. There's a lot of different types of work out there, and it's best if I connect you to the people actually doing that work. So if you have questions and you want to be connected after this conversation, I'm happy to do so. The example I'm going to share of work happening under bilateral water management agreements is that's going on in the Liard Basin. So water in the Liard Basin touches British Columbia, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. So in 2022, those local committees, those bilateral management committees, decided that they needed to work together to develop a learning plan for the Liard. So we call this like a trilateral agreement. And the committees jointly decided to develop the learning plan following the land and people's relationship model that was developed by Elder Copper Jojak. And I've given you the website address for that model, Respect, Care, Share. It's pretty fantastic. So again, I encourage you to go visit that website. And if you need that link again after my talk, happy to share it. This work really kicked off in May 2003 when 13 elders from across the Liard subbasin gathered to share knowledge and concerns about the Liard River. The event was seen as historic and resulted in a What We Heard report of Indigenous knowledge that was shared at that meeting. This report will provide the foundation for the next steps in the learning plan process, and that process will be further developed by those 2 bilateral committees I referred to earlier. You can find this report, if you're interested, on the Mackenzie River Basin Board website under the Bilateral Water Management Agreement section. If you can't find it, reach out. I'll happily send it to you. Okay, and now for the third area that I wanted to touch on, and that is the state of aquatic ecosystem reporting. So the board has a duty to report on the state of the aquatic ecosystem of the whole basin. And in 2021, the board published an online State of the Aquatic Ecosystem report, and you can find that at soaer.ca. Excuse me. The report focuses on 4 indicators. They are water quantity, water quality, health and well-being, and species and habitat. And the signs and signals that inform those indicators were collaboratively developed over quite a long period of time through conversations in different parts of the basin, and also guided through the advice and guidance of elders in the basin. Is there anything else I wanted to say there? I feel there was, and I've forgotten it. Okay, I'll come back if there's something I've forgotten, an important point. The report is based on the idea of a 3-strand braid, with one of the strands representing the Indigenous knowledge systems that currently are in the basin and the information that they contributed to the report. The second strand is Western science, and the third strand is that co-created story that was brought together without comparison or integration of one knowledge system to the other. We really tried hard to make sure the knowledge was, that we didn't mush everything together, that we're very distinct, that here is the Indigenous knowledge that was shared with us on this sign or signal for this water, and here's some of the science data. You looked at it collectively to sort of say, okay, it looks like things are changing or they're not changing. Yeah, so I just jumped ahead a little bit here. The focus was on change. And we took a qualitative assessment approach to the information. And we gave it, assigned 3 different ratings. So we looked at, an indicator could have minimal or no change, moderate change, or significant change. And our benchmark was the 2003 State of the Aquatic Ecosystem Report, because that was the first one published by the Mackenzie River Basin Board. The ratings as to whether things had changed or not were determined across knowledge systems for individual signs and signals, and then collectively looked at to inform an indicator. Where individual ratings were different across knowledge systems, that difference was preserved. And so we have statements such as there's been moderate to significant change or minimal to moderate change. The most significant emerging trend on the basin since 2003 is widespread and stronger evidence of climate change impacts in this basin. I don't think that comes as a surprise to many people on this call. The changes include rising air temperatures, more variable surface water levels, changing populations of wetland-dependent wildlife, increases in some areas, decreases in others. There are still concerns regarding contamination of water and fish. And there's overall, the whole basin, there's an increased concentration of ions. Ions are naturally occurring salts. So things like calcium, sodium, magnesium, and they were not at levels that were a concern for human health or aquatic biota anywhere in the basin. But it was notable that across this massive landscape, there was an overall trend towards an increased concentration of ions. And so there are people who are more well-positioned, better positioned to look at that than I, who are thinking about why that might be. The signs and signals assessed in the State of the Aquatic Ecosystem Report do not stand in isolation. Rather, together they represent an overall status of aquatic ecosystem health. One of the questions I was asked to think about were the challenges that might arise from taking this approach to watershed governance. And the one that keeps coming back to me is just the size of the basin. It's really like going back again to Director Rona Martin's comments, making sure that people living in the basin know what we're doing and why we're doing it, and getting their opinions and feedback is hard when you're covering 18% of Canada. And I'm thrilled the board is looking at that a little closer. And then the other thing, on the one hand, it's nice. I don't have to apply for grants and compete with the rest of you for a limited pot of funds. But by being housed within Environment Canada, I also have to abide by the rules and policies of the Government of Canada with regards to funds, and that can be restrictive in a different way. So I think those are two challenges that I'm constantly wrestling with, but you know, everyone has their challenges. I don't think we figured out a perfect system yet. And that is it for my talk. I would encourage you to reach out to me if you have questions. Love it if you would go to the MRBB website or the State of the Aquatic Ecosystem Report website. Plans are in place to update that online report. So any reactions, thoughts, suggestions that you have, I would love to hear. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula. That is a massive amount of space in our country that the Mackenzie Basin Board is covering. So really appreciate you sharing those insights and the work that you're doing. Another reminder, please, if you've got questions, I've got a few already brewing for Paula, but if others have questions, please put them in the chat so we can dig into those in a little bit. We have one more panelist that's gonna present right now, and that is Kim Manronos, the co-chair of the Nechako Watershed Roundtable. So I'm sure that Kim probably doesn't need an official intro, but I'm going to do it because you deserve to have that, and just to make sure that everyone knows exactly who you are and how you show up here in this important role. So Kim is the manager in the Northern and Interior region of the Fraser Basin Council, and she's based in Prince George. And at Fraser Basin Council, Kim oversees the work that supports the climate change and air quality, watersheds and water resources, and community sustainability. Kim oversees the Prince George Air Improvement Roundtable, manages the Prince George Air Quality Monitoring Society, and the First Nations Caribou Recovery Implementation Fund, and is the co-chair of the Nechako Watershed Roundtable. Kim lives in Prince George with her husband and her 2 teenage sons. So thank you, Kim. I will hand it over to you for your part in the presentation.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And thank you, Rona and Paula, so much for your perspectives. You know, Paula, I have to say, whenever I generally talk to BC audiences about the Nechako Watershed Roundtable, the size of our watershed is a major talking point. And now I feel a little humbled by the space that you are working within. And I'm really grateful to have that perspective, you know, shared at this table. I'd like to just quickly acknowledge that my office and where I live is in the Lheidli traditional territory in Prince George, Hadi, and thank you for the space today to share about the Nechako Watershed Roundtable. So I'll share my screen. So yeah, in terms of like all of us supposedly being experts by now, yeah, the first time that you just assume that it's all going well is the day that it doesn't work. So I'm gonna, can you see my screen? Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. Okay, so I'll just move it so I'm looking at it straight on. So again, like I said, our massive Nechako watershed, it is a large part of the Upper Fraser watershed. So it's within the Fraser, and the naming of the Fraser River, I guess, was sort of the rest of the Upper Fraser above the confluence at Prince George of the Nechako and Fraser Rivers, right here, is just slightly smaller on the Nechako side. Hence, it's the Fraser River and not the Nechako River that meets Vancouver. But I just want to acknowledge the number of people, the number of communities within the watershed. We're home to 15 First Nations, and I'm going to read those out to you. I know we don't have tons and tons of time, but I want to acknowledge everyone here. We are home to Binchi First Nation, Cheslata Carrier Nation, Lake Babine First Nation, Claytley Tene First Nation, Nadli-Waten, Nakosli-Waten, Natai Bun Band, Saikas First Nation, Skintai Nation, Stillatin First Nation, Takla Nation, Glasden Nation, Silkasko First Nation, Wet'suwet'en, and Yukuche First Nation. We are also home to 5 municipalities: Burns Lake, Fort St. James, Fraser Lake, Prince George, and Vanderhoof, as well as the 2 regional districts, the Regional District of Bulkley-Nechako and the Regional District of Fraser-Fort George. And I acknowledge and identify them because of sort of the size and, further in the presentation, I'll speak to the challenges that that some of this kind of space presents in this context. So in terms of formation of the roundtable, really the Nechako watershed has been heavily influenced for generations now by historic industrial activity, and especially the damming of the Nechako in the early 1950s by the Kinney Dam. If you don't know the story, there are YouTube videos that document this change in the flow dynamics of the Nechako River and some of the impacts seen by that. But some of those impacts continue today with heavy forest harvesting and other industrial impacts going on in the watershed. And again, I'll just direct you to Saika's First Nations website, where they have developed a documentary describing the impacts to their territories, which are heavy and severe. So of course, these activities impact the health of aquatic species and creates challenges for water security, water quality and quantity for other water users, among other issues. And then, of course, that leads to direct impacts on specific species like the endangered Nechako white sturgeon, and salmon stocks throughout the watershed have seen a decline. The climate is changing faster and having more dramatic impacts in the northern parts of the province, and that's expected to continue. So already we've seen heavy impacts from mountain pine beetle, major epidemic, and then continuous repeated wildfires following that epidemic that are hard enough to contend with, but recent drought conditions are continuing to be an issue. And generally, we also have a lack of data for lakes and rivers in the Nechako and most of the north in general. And that means that in order to advance watershed health, community-led groups like the NWR are ever more critical. As we're talking about governance in particular today, our group is not an incorporated society. We are guided by a core committee. The NWR itself as a body was inaugurated in October 2015, so we're just a year shy of our 10-year anniversary. And this structure has remained relatively consistent throughout the past 9 years and supports a consensus-based decision-making model described in the terms of reference. So ultimately, NWR's role in this context is to bring people together to work through these common goals. We convene partners, collaborators, decision makers, and doers to address the issues that are identified. So we, as a collective, identify common priorities and actions, how to address them. We advocate for the watershed with all orders of government. And when I say advocate for the watershed, the top sort of issues of concern are identified in our strategic plan, include mostly physical impacts like water quality and quantity, but also well-being of communities and the connection between the watershed. Water is life, so connections between the watershed and community health. And of course, that does mean economy as well. Our economy is very closely aligned with resource activity but the health of our natural systems as well. And then ultimately, the NWR aims to advance reconciliation with First Nations by collaborating and upholding UNDRIP to support its implementation. So we developed our first strategic plan in 2021. As I said, the group's been in existence since 2015 and collaborates with, we collaborated with all 4 orders of government and the private sector, civil society to develop the strategic plan and develop this shared commitment and vision for the health of the watershed. And within that, strategic plan. We're guided by these 5 strategic priorities. And I know you can read them. They're also available on our website. And maybe I can ask Tasha to throw our URL there into the chat. But I'm going to go ahead and just jump into some of the challenges. So similar to the other groups, well, we have a large geographic area. That means that there are a lot of interests within that amount of space, a lot of people to connect, a lot of issues and different interests, and a lot of distance between those. So there is a significant work that needs to be done to create the collaboration and collective work that needs to happen in order for us to advance watershed health. And of course, there are other issues that impact that, meaning, so the next one there that you see is the lack of delegated authority for stewardship in the Nechako or in water in general in the province of BC. I really appreciated Zita's comments on perspectives, on integrating those perspectives in implementation of projects as we move towards shared authority on the land base. A lot of this work involves building relationships and trust, and that work needs to be supported by ongoing funding. So we're all, talking about this as a major issue. So I just want to shout out to Ian and ECCC for showing the Nechako some love through recent funding announcements, very recent, but as early as, or as recent as January of this year, the core committee of this group were sort of in a position of begging money from the provincial government to just keep the lights on, but a lot of things fell into place, and we are very gratefully in a position to advance some of our priorities. However, they're not necessarily long-term. We're going year to year. And so I'll just make that point extra strong, that ongoing year-to-year funding is critical to building the relationships and trust to be able to do the work. And then finally, as I said, those climate change impacts are outpacing action that any of us is able to keep up with. So we're all facing that challenge, so I'm not going to dwell on that. But I will dwell a little bit on successes because I want to end on a positive note. We have supported and hosted and partnered on several popular youth paddling events. And you can see in the photograph, this is from a couple of years ago, sorry, I have notes here that I want to make sure I covered some of these, but the main benefits of these events is the simple exposure of young people to the river and the environment. How many youth do we know? How many people do we know that have never been in a canoe or never been out on the water and are not necessarily aware of the kinds of careers or learning that can be done to support future work in watersheds? And that's really important. And there was some added cultural engagement and art creation that made these paddling events extra special, and I'm really proud of those. The lakes monitoring strategy was a major dream of Wayne Selesky, and we're so grateful to have Wayne working with us. He's a powerhouse and a connector. Couldn't do any of it without him. But over the past 3 years, we acquired the funding to build the strategy, and now thanks to Ian and ECCC, we're able to start the implementation of that strategy. Just the successful gathering of self-identified members of the Roundtable annually at this fall event, and then again in the spring to share technical updates and things, is the key function of the Roundtable as a convener to foster collaboration and connection. And really, in light of the comments that we've all shared about funding challenges, just having a website and social media presence costs money, but is an enormous success, I think, that we can sort of hang our hats on and move forward with it. They are really enabling us to connect. And then finally, I just want to say that this, like the point here, widespread collaboration, what I'm referring to is that the successes of our partners is really what makes the NWR a success in general. In particular, UNBC researchers that, like Margot Parks, that have advanced the co-learning in our Watersheds Initiative, which connected School District 91 with ecological conservation and learning initiatives. The Nechako portal, which you heard about earlier, which is going to be a really important tool going forward in the lakes monitoring strategy and sharing that information. Significant fish habitat restoration work by Wayne with the Nechako Environment and Water Stewardship Society, ongoing work by the Nulkai-Tachik Stewardship Society and Living Lakes Canada, who conducted a project earlier. I think we got the results this year. Time is flying by in my head really, really fast. So it feels like it was a year ago, but I think it was just recently. And then all of these just support NWR's vision for a healthy watershed and acknowledging that this isn't just for us, it's for the generations ahead of us. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much for this opportunity and appreciate you all being here.
Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing the work that the Nechako Roundtable is doing. So this is our panel discussion part of the conversation, and so I'm really excited to dig into some of these pieces and learn a little bit more around some of the elements that you each spoke about in the work that you're doing and some of those priorities and the successes and of course some of those challenges. Is it possible? Oh, we've got Rona there as well. Okay, great. So maybe let's see here. Maybe Paula, we'll start with you. And I guess before I go into our questions, and again, a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We did see some already coming up in there. That's awesome. This crew of folks is such a wealth of knowledge on the work that's happening at the watershed level and how we move forward around this local watershed planning management. And so let's make sure we can get the most out of their experience. So Paula, starting with you, I really appreciated sort of, as I mentioned, sort of at the end of your conversation, but just the scale of the Mackenzie River Basin. And even I was really surprised to hear that it's 18%. That's massive. And so, of course, the board is playing a really important role in collaborating across the basins. You mentioned the 13 members, and then the one Indigenous and one government member from each of the provinces or territories that are a part of that. And then, of course, the bilateral water management agreements. So something that I think comes up quite a bit when we talk about watershed level boards, governance, and I think in the BC context, I'd love to dig in a little bit around, we have the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, so DRIPA, and of course, federally, there's, UNDRIP. And of course, that sets out that legal framework for upholding the rights of Indigenous peoples to advance reconciliation. And co-governance with nations is, of course, a really vital and important part of ensuring the watershed security and health of these watersheds and the management moving forward. And so I'd love if you could talk a little bit more around sort of the Mackenzie River Basin Board and how you folks have been navigating this journey and what with the many nations, of course, that are within the basin. And yes, in BC, but in the other provinces or territories. And what is that journey of co-governance and planning with the nations and with the provincial, territorial, and federal representatives look like, moving forward? I know that's a really big question, so I'm just going to acknowledge that, but it's definitely a big conversation that comes up quite a bit when we talk about watershed governance. And so, yeah, if you can share some insights and where things are at and what that potentially looks like going forward, that would be fantastic.
Thanks for that question. It is a big, meaty question. So hopefully what I'm going to share will have some flow to it. It'll make sense to me, but hopefully hopefully I'm able to articulate the connection for everyone else. Water, to start with, is complicated, right? Like there's, and from a legal perspective, I'm not a lawyer, but from a legal perspective, there are different pieces of legislation on that landscape, the Mackenzie River Basin landscape, that are at play, and it's not consistent across the landscape. So that is one place that we sometimes end up starting at, just from a basic point of view. For example, there's the Natural Resources Transfer Act, which is specific to Saskatchewan and Alberta, right? It doesn't really touch the other three provincial territorial jurisdictions. And that means the conversation around water in that part of the basin is a little different than it is in BC or Northwest Territories or Yukon. There's also the fact that Northwest Territories and Yukon have gone through devolution in relatively recent history. So I think the best way to answer this question is to remind everybody it's complex, but where I see most hope, I think, where I see the most activity that makes me smile is piecemeal, but it's throughout the basin. So for example, you mentioned DRIPA and the UNDRIP legislation federally, and Northwest Territories, for example, has also adopted a version of the Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples legislation. But in addition to that, there have been actions in the basin that precede any legislation that have contributed to how the board operates well in the basin. And an example I'd like to give is what happens in Northwest Territories. So the government of Northwest Territories has an Indigenous Elders Council for water. And so, and they are governed and guided by that council as they talk about policy and priority and activity in that huge part of the basin. That's partly why I'm focused on them, is that they are a significant part of the basin. That is, for example, that council, while the Indigenous members are appointed by a government, in Northwest Territories, it is that council that identifies the individual that will be sitting on the Mackenzie River Basin Board. And that individual's role, one of their roles is to go back to that council and share information, look for shared priorities and opportunities. So I think I use that as an example, but I think it's also one of the ways that the Mackenzie River Basin Board has allowed for those place-based or good working relationships that will look different across the basin to develop. The reality, I live in Alberta, so I can speak a little more to that. It's very different in Alberta. We have a very different, when we have conversations in Alberta with First Nations communities or Indigenous governments, it's a different tone, it's a different type of conversation. But there's still a lot of pieces are at play that are still walking towards the same end goal, which is good watershed governance. So it's not a very complete answer, but what I'm trying to hopefully articulate well is that the nature of the board and the high level that sort of the board members operate at allow for these place-based processes to develop. They don't try to impinge upon each other because we are in a different legal landscape, depending on where you are in the basin. But there is encouragement and collaboration to try and learning from each other so that individual people, because that's the thing, right? When you come to a table like this, there's the people and then there's the perspective or the governments they represent. But you're really trying to connect the people and enable them to go back to their communities or their governments and bring the best of what's happening in the rest of the basin with them. That makes sense? So I've got off track a little bit, and I apologize, but it's a big question.
No, I thank you. It's a huge question. I know it's like a big one to kick us off with, but I think it's an important piece that, and I, as we, as non-Indigenous or as settler, like people working in doing this work, like how and we think about how do we come together? How do we ensure that we're doing this work in this collaborative partnership way that is like lifting up the reconciliation, lifting up rights of Indigenous people, and because we all benefit, right? When we can do this in an effective and collaborative and trust-based way. So I thank you for working through that, and because I think there's so much value that those on the call, and I know for myself, we can take from learning through processes that are in place and that work and relationships that are happening to make the work stronger and better. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that perspective. Rona, why don't I flip over to you here for the next question? And I just want to say how much I appreciate the work that the Shuswap Watershed Council has been doing over these years, and you spoke to sort of the impact of a lot of that work over from its inception. And I really loved how you mentioned how the lake was that real common theme that pulls everyone together. And I think that's so true in communities across the province where folks are doing this work at that watershed level. It's such place-based work, and it's where communities can relate, obviously, to where their water comes from, and then of course those impacts. You acknowledge the funding challenges, of course, and the changes recently. And of course, that need for really good communication to really tell those stories. You mentioned a little bit about going forward, how important that's going to be in telling the stories of the work that the council has done, and where you need to go and can go. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to the funding is an important part of it. But in addition to sort of that funding, if there's other key sort of elements or supports that you think are going to be really critical to the Shuswap Watershed Council, advancing this work, continuing to advance this work going forward, whether that's through partnerships or policy changes that could really help propel the work forward, in the process of continuing the work that's already started, and maybe where you need to go with some of your other work, that some of the folks on the call may be able to learn from, and or engage in supporting the work in the Shuswap. Sorry, Rona, you're muted.
That's also a tough question because it's just me you're talking to. It's not my board, and my board may have totally different
of course
things to say. So, when we were dealing with the referendum, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, why couldn't this be one of the things that we didn't have to go out to the public for? We don't have to go out to the public to provide garbage collection. So it's just mandatory. We don't have to go to the public to provide economic development. And I'm speaking as a regional district director. In a municipality, they have much more flexibility, but in a regional district, we have to go out to the public to establish any kind of service, except for these ones that are laid out by the province. So, I'm wondering if maybe because, we're seeing that there's more interest in protecting our watersheds, I'm wondering if maybe we could actually begin to lobby the province and say, can this be added as one of the functions that we don't have to go out to get permission from the people for? In the questions that was on the chat, what we were dealing with when the referendum was coming through was horrendous. I mean, we had to stop the referendum process. We had to deal with the leftover from COVID, where there was so much negativity. And I think that as a local government representative, and I know that there's other local government representatives on the call today, I think that there's a lot of work that we have to do to try and gain back the trust of the public. COVID really damaged a lot of things. And I think that that's where we have to to work at. But in saying that, having local people involved at the table that are not elected, that are just our community members, will help with that, I believe. That, you know, the more people that you get involved, it starts to kind of weave together, and then the word gets out that, yeah, you know, these people aren't just a bunch of flakes that want to restrict our land use, because that's what people think. Oh, you're going to tell us that we can't do this anymore and we can't do that anymore. And everybody thinks like that until there's an issue, and then they say, oh my goodness, why didn't you do something? And, you know, like, keep the cows out of the river, that the river's feeding into the lake, and the water intake is, you know, a mile down, you know. So really, I don't know if I can provide a really good idea of where we should be going forward. Other than, you know, I mean, the way we got bashed in this referendum, and just the lack of understanding of the work that we were doing has really made really made it challenging. And I guess, you know, we should know this, but, you know, you just dial things back a few years, and the grassroots stuff, it's always the best, isn't it? You know, it's kind of like the comfort stuff. It's like, you know, going to share food, and, you know, grandma's whatever is the one that everybody goes to because it makes them think of their home. And so, you know, when you can build stuff like that, then I think it remains solid. And I think, you know, being cautious about how you're spending your money, and not kind of not duplicating services, because I think that tends to upset people when they say, well, so and so is doing that and so is doing that. So, for instance, what we have been doing is we've been giving some of the funds that we get to another organization, the Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society, and they've been the ones that have been monitoring the water for the invasive mussels. So they have more capability of doing that kind of work. They've got staff on the ground, and we don't really have staff on the ground. We've got, you know, Aaron and Alex, and that's it. And so, you know, a lot of people don't realize that. So if we don't exist, they don't have that funding. If the invasive mussels get into the water, I mean, the devastation will be awful for everybody actually in BC, because the impact just on hydro alone, having to clean the fins and everything on the generation capacity, will increase everybody's hydro rates, never mind what it does to tourism and things like that. So yeah, I'm just, like Paula, I rambled. I'm sorry.
No, that was wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think just the insights that you share around that piece of people's, like, either their understanding and knowledge of, like, the role of what a local elected person is doing on behalf of a community, and even that piece where you talked about, you know, other local people that are a part of this conversation and part of that process. Because I think to your point, it's about how are we ensuring that we're building trust and relationships at the community level, where these conversations and discussions can be had around, you know, what work needs, like what is the state of our watershed, you know, where does our water come from, and then, you know, hard decisions need to be made. That is a part of governing. But if people are a part of sort of that process or those conversations, and there is that trust, then even if the result is maybe not what they want, there was transparency around how they got there. And I think people can understand, right, like, where you got to that. So I think you just, like, you emphasize such an important piece of just collectively, I think what communities across the province, like, are working through. And I also think that when it comes to some of the you know, to your funding kind of, like, challenges, the challenges that local, you know, governments and regional districts, like, are coming up against now in a very new water world in the province, are not things that you know, local governments have actually had to grapple with. And some of those pieces are not even ultimately part of your jurisdiction to need to be doing. And so where is like, the province or others showing up to actually support that? And, and I just, UBCM obviously just happened, right? The Union of BC Municipalities Convention. And so, water like came up in many, many conversations that were happening there. And perhaps you were there, so maybe you.
No, I didn't go this.
Yeah, but one thing I just wanted to share on the funding piece, because that's obviously such a critical piece of supporting the work that you folks have been doing, and I know is like across the board, right? Like it is such a challenge. And that so for the second time back in 2021 and then just this past year at UBCM, resolutions have been passed that are calling for the scale of funding and investments that are needed to support the work that's happening at the local level, for communities to do this work. And both of those resolutions were in relation to the Watershed Security Fund, but that just goes to show, right? Like there is a real need and united demand for that kind of action to support this work that's happening. And I think a big part of that, like we've talked, I think in my presentation and through these conversations, we've talked a bit about the province's role, but I think it is important to recognize that the federal government does have a role to play there. And of course philanthropic, like world and private sector plays into that as well. But it's like, how do we ensure everyone's working together? And on the we've seen some really good investments like from the province, again, supporting this work that needs to go forward. But even with the federal government and the Freshwater Action Plan, I mean, the scale of investments is like by no means at what is needed. And when we look at the distribution across the priority basins in the country, like it's a real fraction of nationally what British Columbia is getting, when you look at how much is being put into the Great Lakes and other places, and the challenges that BC is facing. And so collectively across the board, like the province, the feds, and others really need to like lift up the investments that are going in to support this critical work, because it's only going to start costing more money, and that money is going to come from taxpayers regardless. So let's get in front of it and like be able to do that planning and management. So I just thank you. I know you are like, you and so many others are on the front line trying to do this important work with very limited resources. And I think this is just such an important piece that we need to, and I think when we talk about how do we come together to move this forward, this is a really important place, I think, where we have to collectively raise our voices and say, this work is important, this work is making a difference in our communities, and this work needs to be funded and supported, because ultimately it costs less than if we don't. So yeah, thank you. I just clearly added my own little 2 cents there, but I just, it's just such an important part of what makes this work happen across the board. So I'm going to pivot over to you, Kim, and I wanted to just, you at the end, you talked a little bit about some of the successes and things that you're really proud about, and the work that the Roundtable has been doing. And one of those things that you mentioned was around the large lake monitoring strategy. And of course, some energy.
I'm still here.
Off. There you go. And so you talked about the large lakes monitoring strategy, and now with some additional funding to move that work forward, and build off of that strategy and look at the more of the long-term kind of monitoring work that needs to happen or to build that kind of capacity and knowledge. Can you tell us a little bit more around like what that like what made that so successful, and like what makes you proud of that work, and walk us maybe through some of that process that has contributed to sort of the success that you've had so far, and maybe what you're excited about what's to come now that you have that funding to put that strategy into action.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for asking about that. Yeah, we are really proud of that. I think it's kind of a water on rock situation in terms of like what we've been talking about for several years, a need for baseline data. Like I said, so many lakes, there just isn't any data set, or if there is, it's from the early 1980s. So we just don't know what the conditions are that salmonids are like enduring to get, down the Fraser and then back up again. So that we're hoping to answer a whole bunch of those questions. But the process was, the NWR core committee, or sorry, the NWR, because we're not an incorporated society, we don't have a defined list of members, but we do have this executive or core committee that is, I think, pretty tireless, and everyone has, probably the NWR is off the side of most people's plates, and Tasha, Lindsay, and I are all employees of the Fraser Basin Council, and so we often act in this capacity as a secretariat or as a supporting organization for many other smaller organizations. And I'm really grateful to be involved in this work because it enables us to help advance those processes that are collaborative, that include all the perspectives that will need to be at the table, so that we don't leave anyone out. And I think that in developing the strategy, we relied heavily on our partners at the on the core committee, Wayne and his sort of network of connections on water, quality water and fish. I just can't really say enough about leaning into the connections that I don't necessarily have. I'm not a water professional, but leaning into and working with those folks who do have the connections to collaborate and enable that collaboration. And then I think in this case, that having someone there to kind of facilitate those processes is a bit key. Like Rona works with Aaron Vieira and Alex Deschantel, also from the Fraser Basin Council. We're not the success metric here, the key to success here, but I think just having, like in Paula's case, having a board or a body that is funded and there to support and facilitate makes all the difference.
Thanks, Kim. Rona, did you have
yeah, if I could just say something,
ahead. We talk around the table, and it's people like Aaron and Alex and Kim that take what we say and move it forward, because we are gathered at that table for a short period of time, and then we have to go on to the next table. And, myself personally, I'm so grateful that we have Aaron and Alex, to make sure that they move every crazy idea that we have along. And that's, that's the key. If you have great staff, it makes things so much easier. And when you have funding and you don't have to worry about the funding all the time, because if you're worried about having the funding, then how are we going to keep these people to move our discussions forward? It's just this cycle that goes along all the time. So if you have the funding secured, that takes such a load off, and you have an agreement in place, with Fraser Basin Council to provide these two staff people, we're good to go. And we've all been probably members of a small community association or something, and the secretary takes the notes and then she's not at the next meeting, so somebody else has to do things, and in that box someplace there is everything, but where exactly it is, you don't know. So when we have staff, they know it's not in the box, it's in a file, or it's on it's in the computer. So we need to be supported. I've sat around the table with brilliant people, and brilliant people on their own sometimes even aren't that brilliant, but the collective wisdom of the whole group is what makes everything shine.
Well said, Rona. Thank you, and thanks, Kim, for sharing more about the work that around the large lakes monitoring. I haven't done my job that great because we are over time. So I'm sorry for that. I know that there have been some questions in the chat that came up, just in the interest of keeping the agenda on schedule. There were the few questions that were in the chat. We'll make sure that those questions can be covered in the meeting summary, and that there can be some responses to that. So we can make sure that those questions do get answered. So my apologies. But I really just want to thank Kim and Paula and Rona for just sharing about the important work that you're doing and the impact in your communities. And I learned a lot, and I can only imagine the others did as well. And yeah, together we're stronger. And so let's keep this important work going forward. And I so appreciate the time everyone shared with us today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Corey. Thanks for being here. And I'll just stay on the spotlight here. It's because well, first I just want to say thank you, Corey and Paula and Rona. It was really great to be on a panel with you. I feel like the conversation obviously could have gone on a lot longer, and there's so much more to learn. There's a lot of comments and questions in the chat, so we'll include those in the summary report. Without further ado, though, I would like to introduce Brian Frankel. Brian is District of Vanderhoof Councillor and a member of our core committee, and Brian's going to share about an upcoming event, an initiative of the Nechako Watershed Roundtable. Take it away.
Well, thanks. And I'm late to the party today, but I'm also the one standing between you all and lunch. But first and foremost, I want to give a big shout out to an early mentor of mine through UBCM and Rona. Rona, we haven't worked together very much, and this was neat to see you on a camera. So I love that, Rona. Here we are all of these years after we've been at UBCM. So shout out to you. That's awesome.
You're on my mind this week, Brian, dealing with your community's issues. You've been on my mind.
Thanks a lot, Rona. You bet. So here we are, and I'm going to use a Rona quote. Staff do take what we say and discuss our crazy ideas, our momentum, all of those things, and they push them forward. And here we are. We're looking at a subgroup or a committee that was struck to go away and try to come up with a climate change adaptation and resiliency workshop. And through several meetings and participation through lots of people throughout British Columbia, from Northern BC, from the District of Vanderhoof, Northern Health, UNBC, Fraser Basin Council, and the Community Energy Association, we've gotten to a point where we have a date. So we're working on this. So we will, and we purposely put it after the election. We didn't want to try and get it anywhere in before. It would probably get lost. So I just wanted to let everybody know that we will be going November 29th. Place yet to be determined, because the numbers are larger than we expected. We were trying UNBC, but that had a seating capacity of 60, and I think we're looking for 100 or more. So just wanted to let you know that. It'll be a day of the first part of the morning will be a recap of where we are and on climate change, and specifically to the Nechako watershed. So I think that that's important. We can look at it at a provincial level. We can look at it at a federal level, but we're going to drill this down to a climate change and what it means on the Nechako watershed. I like flashing this book every once in a while because I've had a part in it. There's the science behind it of changing climate in the Nechako watershed. Back in 2007, it predicted 4 or 5 outcomes. I think Wayne and I have discussed these more than anybody, but those 4 or 5 outcomes have all come true, from socioeconomic impacts to 2 major sessions of fires years apart to drought. And the problem was nobody would listen to the local group. And so I think what we're going to try and do, recap in the morning. We've hired Dan George from his company, Four Directions Management. He's going to facilitate us in the afternoon to come up with a framework, a pledge, something that we take back to our organizations and communities and we push forward, and at least get that ball started and get it rolling forward, because we need to move this forward. We can't wait for others. While we wait, we get these massive droughts and we get these massive fires and we get massive rainstorms and all of these things. So November 29th, it'll be in Prince George, and I don't think we have a place yet, do we? Kim, Tash, is Tash on? I
No,
don't think
not
we do
yet, but
Yeah,
hopefully
still,
by next.
yep, by next week. So we'll get that out. It's just to let you know that we have been working on that, and here we are. We've got a date and speakers lined up. We're still, I think we'd like to see the Lieutenant Governor come up. She's passionate about these things, but we'll see what she's up to. Kim, I think that's it for me, and I didn't mean to take much time because lunch is around the corner.
That was absolutely perfect, Brian. Thank you for highlighting that. And I will, yeah, we are right around the corner. So with the last 2 minutes of the meeting time, I want to say, I have a list of ways I want to express my gratitude, or two people. So first of all, I am going to thank our speakers today. Ian, Zita, thank you so much for being here and sharing really important information, and then resources that you shared in the chat as well. Really great to have you here. And I think, like, you know, if I can speak for the whole core committee, we're honored to have you speak at our annual meeting. And to the panelists and Corey, I already said thank you as a panelist, but I'll say thank you as the co-chair. Corey, thank you for moderating that panel for us, and Paula and Rona for attending and sharing your perspectives that I know we all still have so much to learn. I learned a lot today. And not last, but definitely not least, almost greatest, is thank you to Tasha and Lindsay. Tasha for organizing this event, setting it all up, doing all of the invites and the agenda and pretty much everything behind the scenes, and Lindsay for supporting us today. Lindsay and Tasha have been helping behind the scenes with notes and messages and things like that going on, spotlighting with the Zoom. I think we all have a lot to learn there too. Without further ado, I will thank all of you for joining us today. Two things I want to say. The spring technical meeting, stay tuned for information. Probably will focus on the lakes monitoring strategy and implementation. So that's usually in May. And September 30th, Monday, is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Look for events or ways in your community to mark the day, and enjoy the weekend. Thank you so much to everyone for being here, and we'll talk to you again next year.